5:30, I'll go ahead and re-log in. Or does it matter? It doesn't matter, right?
4, 3, 2, 1. We're going live.
Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, July 27th, 2020. I call the meeting to order and ask all of you to rise and please follow in the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. A bit of housekeeping. In order to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus, Governor Newsom has issued executive orders that temporarily suspend requirements of the Brown Act, which allows Planning Commission members to attend Planning Commission meetings telephonically. Given the health risks associated with COVID-19, the City Council chambers remain closed to the public until further notice. If you would like to participate in tonight's meeting, we would strongly urge you to watch the meeting on Costa Mesa TV, which is Spectrum Channel 3, or AT&T Uverse Channel 99. You can also watch online at youtube.com/Costa Mesa TV. If you'd like to participate in tonight's meeting via Zoom webinar, you can find the login information password on the agenda for tonight's meeting, which is on our city website. You may also participate by telephone through Zoom by calling 1-669-900-6833. And the webinar ID is 937-7058-2959. The password 722955. With that, Julie, please call the roll.
Chair Jericho,
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan,
Here.
Commissioner Colbert absent, Commissioner Perkins,
Here.
Commissioner Russell,
Here.
Commissioner Torje is absent, Commissioner Zick.
Here. Okay, thank you, Julie. So tonight is a poignant night for us on the Planning Commission. We are bidding adieu, farewell to our Economic and Development Services Director, Barry Curtis, who has announced recently his retirement, a retirement that's well-deserved. And I know, Jennifer, that the city, on behalf of the Planning Commission, has prepared a resolution for Barry. So I'd ask you to read that into the record. I'm sorry, Barry, that we can't do this in person, because I'd give you a big hug. But at any rate, we'll have Jennifer read the resolution into the record and then get it to you one way or the other. And then we'll allow the commissioners to have any comments if they wish. So Jennifer, please. She's frozen in time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. As you can imagine, this is a bittersweet day for us as staff. Oh dear, have I frozen?
So while Jennifer's getting unfrozen,
All right.
this is about 7 times a day when she's in the office trying to get Wi-Fi to work for Zoom. So this is not uncommon for Jennifer's and my meetings during the course of every day.
Well, still working on it. So we'll give her 30 seconds and then we'll just send you on your way without paper, Barry. Okay, go ahead.
Am I back?
A little bit better. Give it a shot.
Okay, I think if we want to move this item to the end of the meeting, I can try to fix my computer problem before then. But in the meantime, I can move forward. Let me know.
Yeah, it's a little herky-jerky. So if you don't mind, yeah, let's save it for the end of the meeting. That might be the better way to go. So because I want to make sure that Barry gets the proper send off. Anyway, So
The
beyond,
downside of remote meetings.
yes, we'll move announcements and presentations to the end of the meeting. Well, after Willie's done with his, we'll send him up to the roof with like an antenna, and then maybe we can get a stronger signal. Okay, so we'll move then to public comments. All matters not listed on the agenda tonight are members of the public can comment on those. Again, these are, if you have comments tonight, these are items that are not on the agenda, but within the Planning Commission's jurisdiction. Ms. Green or Julie, do we have any commenters tonight in public comment?
Well, if any members of the public would like to speak, if you could please raise your hand.
Again, this is for items not on the agenda tonight.
Seeing none, we have no speakers for that.
Okay, we'll close public comment and go to Planning Commission comments, and we'll start with Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really didn't plan for any comments tonight, as I was anticipating that our good friend Commissioner Colbert would be in attendance and would have, I'm quite sure, some very poignant and emotional and appropriate comments to speak on the national news that really has dominated the last couple of days and will dominate at least the next several days in terms of formal plans, and that's the passing of Congressman John Lewis. Some real history made by him throughout his career, and history even being made by him this week. The first Black lawmaker to lie in state, the Capitol Rotunda. But that's not what he'll be remembered for. And I wish I had more prepared comments to speak to the legacy that he's left. And as I say, I'm sorry that Commissioner Colbert is not here. I'm quite sure he'd be prepared to make appropriate comments. But I didn't want to let the news pass, and I felt quite privileged to have the time today to be following the news and the activities. And anyway, that's it for my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Russell?
Here we go. Yeah, just to follow up a little bit. I mean, John Lewis is will go down as a historic figure in the late 20th and early 21st century. But one of the things that I was thinking about was his ability to communicate with all kinds of different people. A few years ago, in order to create something that would educate the new generation, he wrote a graphic novel about his life and the movement. And he went to Comic-Con and in effect he dressed up, did cosplay as himself as a younger person. And that ability to seize the time that he's in now and help to make sure that people don't forget what happened. I think, just that ability to communicate. And yes, I agree. I'm sorry that Commissioner Colbert's not here, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us and not to really recognize the importance of John Lewis's life and legacy. So that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins.
Thank you. So we'll talk about congratulating Barry, I think, at the end, correct?
Or you can do it now if you'd like.
Let me just say now, I really, really appreciated working with you, Barry, welcoming me to the fold here on the Planning Commission, jumping in with incredibly busy items, and you've welcomed me. We have meetings regularly before this where you help explain things and help me understand, and you have done an incredible amount to help me grow into this position and understand the roles and responsibilities of it, and you have just been a tremendous asset for the city of Costa Mesa, and I thank you so much. I also wanted to mention another thing. I want to express my sympathy and condolences to the victims of the horrific crash this morning at 19th and Newport Boulevard. For those who don't know, it appears that a speeding wrong way, possibly DUI driver, was on Newport Boulevard and crashed into at least 7 other vehicles, causing traumatic injuries and, from what I've heard, potentially at least 1 fatality, 1 death as a result of this. I think we need to do more to make our streets safe, and this really highlights that. Vision Zero is something that I have talked about, and is the idea that we should design streets so that nobody dies on them ever. That is an attainable goal. I really strongly feel that nobody should die on their way to work, or on their way to the store, or on their way to pick up their kids. And it's up to us. We have a job as a society. We can decide how our roads are built. We can decide what the acceptable levels of death on our roads are. That is an engineering decision. Other cities, other countries have decided that the acceptable number of deaths on roads is 0. And that's Vision Zero. And other cities have met that goal. Oslo, Norway, it's a city of 670,000 people right now, had 41 traffic deaths in 1975. They were much like us. Last year, they had no cyclist fatalities, no pedestrian fatalities, and only 1 driver fatality when that driver actually drove into a fence. Regardless of what we as a city decide that aiming for 0, whether we decide that aiming for 0 traffic deaths, or if we set a higher number, hey, it's going to be okay for 10 people to die. I think we can all agree that we should be designing our roads for safety. And this really hits home because I know recently I was at a city outreach meeting last year where they were talking about widening Newport Boulevard, which would almost certainly increase the amount of traffic on that road, increase speeds potentially, make it more difficult for pedestrians and bicycles to safely use the space. And I hope we can sit down as a city and agree that what we really want to do is make our roads safer. And so things like widening roads is not going to help anything. And we should really be designing for safety first and foremost. So I hope we can prevent tragedies like these in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will reserve my comments about or for Barry until later in our meeting. But I'm glad Commissioner Perkins did raise the issue about the accident today. I did notice it and appreciate the responsiveness of Costa Mesa Fire and Rescue. A horrific accident, and I think that the lesson we should have, as Commissioner Perkins noted, is that there's things that we can do to avoid these types of accidents. And I don't want to go into details about all the strategies that we might propose, but for me, I agree we do need to focus more on safety and engineering and education. These are the things that are valuable and important, and certain things within our control to do. So those are my comments at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Very good. And I have no comments tonight. And I will defer my comments relative to Mr. Curtis when we present him with his proclamation at the end of the meeting. So we'll move to the consent calendar. We have no items on the consent calendar tonight, and that will take us to then public hearings. Julie, public hearing item number 1, please. Julie. There we go.
Hi, good evening.
We snuck up on you quicker than you thought, probably.
Well, no, I think my computer froze a little bit or something.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
No
Public
worries.
hearing item number 1, planning application 20-04 for conditional use permit for the establishment of a child care learning center in the R2 HD multifamily residential high density zone in conjunction with proposed renovations and additions, including outdoor play areas and shade structures located at 1815 Anaheim Avenue. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Commissioners, any communications to report?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zick.
I just want to mention that I walked around the facility this weekend, but I did not meet with the applicant or any representative.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Walsh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Caitlin Walsh, Assistant Planner. The application before you is a request for a conditional use permit for a child care learning center, Kiddie Academy at 1815 Anaheim Avenue. The project site is located in the city's west side, on the west side of Anaheim Avenue between West 18th Street and Center Street. The property is zoned R2HD, multiple family residential high density, and has a general plan land use designation of high density residential. The properties to the north, west, and south have the same zoning district of R2HD, and the property abuts an apartment complex to the north, single family residences to the west, and the Costa Mesa Women's Club to the south. The property to the east, across Anaheim Avenue, is zoned institutional and recreational and contains Lions Park, Donald Dungan Library, and the Downtown Rec Center. The project site has been occupied by a nonprofit organization, Girls Inc., since 1959. The existing facility, which serves girls aged 6 to 18, was approved through a use variance for the establishment of a social hall, thrift shop, play court, auditorium, and crafts room for a nonprofit organization located in a residential zone. Physical on-site improvements include 3 detached structures totaling 6,391 square feet, 2 existing play yards, and a parking lot with 8 spaces. The property also contains accessory structures within the front setback area, including bleachers, shade elements, and a playground. The existing facility does not have a conditional use permit as required by today's standards. However, because the use was permitted with a use variance, it is considered a legal use with respect to current zoning code requirements and development standards. The proposed project involves the demolition of 2,122 square feet of building area, the remodel of 2 existing detached structures totaling approximately 4,269 square feet, and a new 2,468 square foot building addition. The proposed construction would result in 1 freestanding building totaling 6,737 square feet. The proposed project also involves parking lot improvements to accommodate 26 parking spaces, new landscaping including the front setback area, and the installation of new play equipment and canopy structures for shade. The new construction was evaluated for compliance with current code requirements and development standards. With regard to the use, the new facility would be used for a child care learning center with a total capacity of 114 children, including 8 infants, 12 toddlers, and 94 children aged 2 to 6. The facility proposes 14 employees, inclusive of 12 teachers and 2 administrative staff, and the proposed hours of operation are Monday through Friday from 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. with use of outdoor play areas limited from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's also important to note the proposed facility is a pickup drop-off program only. The subject application is before you this evening because the zoning code requires a CUP for the establishment of a daycare facility and or a nursery school in the R2HD zone. Therefore, the applicant is requesting approval of a CUP to allow the establishment of a child care learning facility to operate at this location in conjunction with proposed renovations and additions as mentioned previously. In staff's opinion, the proposed use is similar to the other non-residential uses in the general neighborhood and is a complementary use for the residential neighborhood. Further, per the general plan, schools, religious institutions, parks, and related public facilities are appropriate in high-density residential areas because their location and intensity of development, and complementary commercial uses such as the proposed use may be allowed provided that the commercial uses will have the same floor area ratio standards as the neighborhood commercial land use designation. The allowable floor area ratio for moderate traffic use in the neighborhood commercial land use designation is 0.25 FAR. Here's a proposed site plan of the child care learning facility. The project proposes 6,737 square feet of building area as mentioned on a 27,000 square foot lot, resulting in an FAR of 0.25, which is consistent with the intensity per the general plan. Their proposed development complies with the city's zoning code as it pertains to building height and setbacks, on-site parking spaces, and overall project FAR. Proposed site improvements also include the installation of new playground equipment and canopy structures for 2 play areas, one for preschool-aged children shown in green, and the other for infant toddlers shown in blue. The proposed play equipment includes 3 play structures within the front yard and 1 play structure within the side yard. Both outdoor play areas are completely enclosed by a minimum 6-foot-high fence or block wall, including an existing 7-foot, 4-inch-high concrete block wall along Anaheim Avenue. In addition, ingress egress to the play yards would be controlled at 2 locations, shown here in red, where 6-foot-high tube steel fences with gates and panic hardware will be installed per plans. On March 4th, 2002, City Council adopted a set of review criteria and conditions of approval for outdoor play areas for children, especially when located next to a street. Consequently, the project was reviewed based on the following criteria, which I will go over in the next few slides. As proposed in condition, the project complies with reinforced perimeter barrier standards for play yards in proximity to a street. Specifically, the proposed play yards would be enclosed by a minimum 6-foot-high fence or block wall, and additionally, the play yard adjacent to Anaheim Avenue would be enclosed by a existing 7-foot, 4-inch-high concrete block wall with impact-resistant bollards spaced 36 to 48 inches apart behind the existing block wall to provide another layer of protection. With regard to the number of children on the play yard at any one time, the maximum number of children engaged in outside play would be 12 on the infant toddler play yard equipment and 24 on the preschool play equipment, with 12 children per preschool structure. Additionally, children would be supervised per the State of California Community Care Licensing Regulations, Title 22. With regard to the location of outdoor play yards, the applicant proposes to utilize the existing play areas and replace the existing equipment and accessory structures with new stationary playground equipment that complies with the playground safety regulations adopted by the State of California. With regard to the shade structures for outdoor play areas, the applicant proposes 2 freestanding canopy structures to satisfy this criteria, one in the front yard and one in the rear yard. The proposed canopy in the rear yard meets residential development standards and is subject to 0 side and rear setbacks. And in the front, the applicant proposes either a freestanding canopy or shade sail not to exceed the height of the existing trellis located within the front setback at 8 feet 9 inches in height. Though accessory structures are not allowed within front yard setback by today's standards, in this case, accessory structures were previously approved through the use variance for Girls Inc. In addition, the project provides a variety of play experiences and proposed play equipment is ADA compliant. Review criteria indicates that the play yard would be visible from the street for surveillance. However, in this case, surveillance from the street is not a concern because the private play yards are completely enclosed, would be monitored by facility staff when in use, and would not be utilized after 5 p.m. Lastly, with regard to play surfaces and the installation of play equipment, the play equipment is proposed on padded artificial turf, and as conditioned, a certified playground safety inspector authorized by the manufacturer is required to confirm that the equipment complies with the minimum playground safety regulations adopted by the State of California prior to final inspection. As it relates to noise standards, the play yards are subject to the exterior noise standards of the City of Costa Mesa as set forth in Section 13-280 of the Zoning Code. In staff's opinion, noise impacts on the subject and surrounding properties are not anticipated because the play yard in the front is enclosed by the existing 7-foot 4-inch concrete block wall along Anaheim Avenue, and a 6-foot block wall along the northern property line directly abuts a driveway and parking area. Additionally, the play yard in the rear is enclosed by the existing block wall to the north, and the applicant proposes a combination of vinyl fencing and mature ficus trees to the west to further buffer noise. Lastly, as proposed in condition, the maximum number of children engaged in outside play at any one time would not exceed 12 for each play structure. With regard to parking, the site contains 8 parking spaces for the nonprofit facility. The zoning code does not specify a parking ratio for nursery schools and/or daycare facilities, and consequently, the required parking for this use is determined by the planning division through the CUP process. The applicant proposes to restripe the parking lot to accommodate a total of 26 parking spaces, including 25 striped spaces and a bike rack, which the city allows credit for. To support the proposed parking count, the applicant prepared a parking study that provides traffic counts in 10-minute intervals throughout the day. Data was collected from similar facilities in the region using computer software that logs when parents check their children in and out of the facility. As proposed and conditioned, the facility is a pickup and drop-off program only, which results in staggered vehicle counts throughout the day. Based on the parking study results, the maximum number of parent vehicles in the parking lot would not exceed 7 cars during the peak drop-off and pickup windows of 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Additionally, the study indicates that approximately 1/3 of the children are 2-sibling households that carpool to the facility, and 15% of staff utilize alternative methods of transportation to arrive at work, which includes walking, biking, and public transportation. When taking all of this into account, the study indicates that the total number of parent and employee vehicles would not exceed 7 for any period of time. Therefore, the anticipated number of vehicles within the parking lot at any given time would not exceed the parking provided. If parking problems arise, staff has included conditions of approval to require the operator to institute whatever operational measures are necessary to minimize or eliminate the problem. Furthermore, staff has included conditions of approval related to hours of operation, operational measures and maximum capacity, outdoor play areas, and parking and site improvements. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the Environmental Quality Act per CEQA Guidelines 15-301, existing facilities, and approved planning application 20-04, subject to conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. We also have the applicant and architect log into tonight's meeting who are representing the project. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Walsh, very much. And again, hats off to you for an exceptionally prepared staff report. I always like reading your staff reports. Are well done. Commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a few questions. And I also want to echo my being impressed, Ms. Walsh, with your staff report. Incredibly thorough, easy to understand, very informative. And when I visited the site and matched up visual observation with what you described, it was, it just made it so easy to understand what was being planned and proposed. So thank you for that hard work. A couple of questions. So on the staff report page 3, you mentioned that the application is not for new development, therefore doesn't activate the provisions of the urban plan. I have 2 questions about that comment. One is why the construction of a new building wouldn't constitute new development and potentially activate the urban plan. And the second question is, what are the aspects of that urban plan that would be either advantageous or disadvantageous to this proposed use?
So with all projects, we recognize whenever it's in an urban plan or specific plan area, this project site happens to be within the Mesa West residential ownership urban plan, which allows a variety of residential development. However, with that being said, you would have to go through a master plan process, and that would go to City Council for review. So this project didn't take advantage of those opportunities because it wasn't a residential project.
Okay, all right, I got that then. Second thing, so there's a fair amount of attention you've given to the issue of noise, and and I'm not overly concerned about that, actually. Overall, I think this is a tremendous use of the site and a need that I'm sure is extremely welcomed by the residential community. But in terms of noise, are you aware of there having been any complaints about noise from the prior Girls Inc. use at the site?
Nothing to my knowledge. I did check with the Community Improvement Division and there have been no noise complaints on file.
All right, so it doesn't sound like we have any indication that noise would necessarily be an issue at this location. The next thing I had a question about, so I appreciated that, and I think this might be standard in terms of conditions of approval. I was concerned about whether the new construction would be sprinklered or not, and you don't have to answer the question. I think it's well covered by the conditions of approval requiring compliance with California Fire Code. So whatever it requires for this kind of occupancy, I'm sure it will be given the proper attention to that issue. The applicant has identified on their floor plan, and it's a question I may ask them also, but they've identified the number of children planned in each of these different age groups. Now, in your staff report, in the terms of the conditions of approval, there's simply a reference to the total number, a maximum number of students, and then some breakdown of how many can be on the playground at any one time. Other than that, do we care, does the city care how many students or children of each age group might be at the site? So in other words, if the site only had 3-year-olds in all the rooms, would we care about that versus the breakdown that they're proposing?
Not necessarily. I think the important thing to highlight here is from the city standpoint, we care about compliance with the state regulations, the community care licensing regulations. So for each age group, there's a required supervisory teacher to student rate. So that's what the city primarily is concerned about.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Excellent job again. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of relatively quick ones. So I noticed that the applicant provided a parking study, which is great, excellent data that really helped. And I noticed the parking study in your presentation, you're saying the parking, they're not anticipating having more than 17 vehicles parked in the lot at any one time. But I noticed that they are building 25 spaces. And so I was wondering, what is that something, did we as the city require that? Was that their proposal? Where did that number come from for 25 instead of 17?
So because there's no specific parking requirement for this use, it's all determined through the conditional use permit. It was something proposed by the applicant. So perhaps you can ask the applicant this as well. But my understanding is with the demolition of that building that was adjacent to the existing parking lot, they wanted to provide more parking than what would be required per the parking study to have some flexibility. And it also didn't affect their FAR. They were already maxed out with FAR and they do comply with their open space. So it was just something that they opted to provide.
Okay. Okay, great. So it wasn't, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't us coming in. I think it might have a follow-up on that. One thing I had, and it's sort of in the same vein of parking, I noticed that they're adding in bike racks, which is excellent, obviously. That's what I like to see. And I noticed in our condition of approval number 25, and I just wanted to get this on the record, I think I know the answer to this. Condition of approval 25, we say that they will install 2 bike racks. And I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that that is a minimum that we're asking, right? So if they wanted to install 3 or 50 bike racks, that would be acceptable under this. Am I correct on that?
Correct. They do receive credit for providing just 1 bike rack, but they can opt to provide however many bike racks they want or that the site can accommodate.
Okay, great. And then one of the things I was thinking about, I mean, one of the, when I look at our city, I see tremendous seas of parking, and that's all land that, you know, we potentially need to store vehicles on, but that could be land used for other things. So one of the things I was wondering about is, would we as a city be okay potentially with a new condition of approval, potentially allowing them to say reduce their parking lot down to 17? Let's say 5 years go by and they, you know, never have more than 15 cars in the lot. Would we be okay with something like a condition of approval saying, hey, they can reduce the parking down to 17 if they replace those extra spaces with, say, bike parking or converting it to some usable landscaped area? Would that be something we'd be okay with at a city level?
I think so. Jennifer Berry, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I don't see Jennifer, so I guess I'll weigh in. Staff would support that. Really, you know, what ends up happening sometimes when people provide more than is minimally required or more than they think is required, it gets conditioned. It's difficult to undo. So allowing some flexibility should the applicant find that in fact they didn't need the extra that they provided, and allowing that to come back to staff is a perfectly reasonable approach, I believe.
Cool. I think I'll ask the applicant if they would like that, but I think that I'd like to see that because then we get more green space, more hopefully usable landscaped area. And then the other thing I noted, page 5 of the staff report is talking about the 2002 City Council guidelines that are requiring them to put in this reinforced bollard. So there's already an existing block wall on the site, but we are requiring them to put in, or they're putting in bollards. And I just wanted to clarify, is that due to a city requirement? So what's going on? I think that was due to the Little Lighthouse tragedy. But so are those bollards, is that a city council direction? Is that their choice? Who's making that call?
It's just part of the review criteria adopted by City Council. So for this, in this particular case, there was the existing block wall, but it was approved in 1965. So there were concerns with if they could meet the current reinforcement standards that, you know, of a vehicle impact. So this is just to provide an additional layer of protection. The alternative would be to have an engineer go out there and do an assessment of the wall. And if for whatever reason it did not meet the current reinforcement standards and it needed to be demolished, that can cause other things as well. So this was, you know, we provided the options to the applicant, and this is something that they decided to move forward with.
Okay, so it is the city council regulation is that when you have an outdoor play area for children next to a street, it must contain like a reinforced block wall or solid bollards, something that would protect that play area from
a vehicle impact. Exactly.
Great. That is all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I don't see any other commissioners with their hands raised. I have a few questions, actually quite a few, but some are for staff and some will be for the applicant. So, Ms. Walsh, do we know when this building, this structure was actually constructed? I know a variance was granted in '59, but do we know when the existing structures were actually built?
I do not have that date on hand. I can get back to you on that. I do know it was around 1959 following the use variance though. So it was kind of phased in. I know there was one existing structure, and then in 1965 when the block wall was approved, I believe the detached garage in the back was also built at that time. So around 1950 to 1960 was when all 3 structures were built.
So you said the existing block wall was permitted in '65 and constructed?
Correct.
And do we have any idea if that's just a straight masonry block wall with no rebar reinforcement of any kind?
That I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, so that'll be something that we can ask the applicant if they know. That's a concern to me if it's unreinforced with rebar.
Can I talk now? Or?
No, I'll get to you, sir. But at the time in '65, that wall was obviously built to code.
Correct.
Code at that time. Okay. Do we know, do we have any idea of the number of children that Girls Inc. served at any one time at a peak period?
I did look for that information in the record and couldn't find that number available.
Okay. Okay, and then we reference, I know you mentioned in your staff report that the structures were evaluated for code compliance. What does that mean?
You mean the existing structures?
Yeah,
Or?
yeah, you talked about in your staff report about, I can't find the exact language, but that the new construction proposed addition were evaluated. Okay, so the new construction proposed addition were evaluated for compliance with current codes.
Yeah, so that was in compliance. So the underlying zone is R2HD, the multiple family residential high density. So it was evaluated with the multifamily residential development standards. And then additionally, the neighborhood commercial moderate traffic FAR.
Right.
So it was both.
Okay. So just for my own education, so a variance granted in 1959 essentially acted as a CUP back then? It carried with the land?
Yes, basically.
All right. So I'm going to go to, again, I'll have to probably ask the applicant this question. Did you have any conversations with the applicant, or did the staff review the parking lot design relative to circulation, queuing, how children were going to be picked up and dropped off? I'm interested in that.
Sure. So the site plan was reviewed by the Transportation Division, so it does meet their requirements. As far as vehicle queuing, we don't anticipate that to be an issue, just because of the age groups that are being served. The parents will actually park their vehicle rather than drop them off and let them out of the car, for instance. They have to check them into the front lobby, where they basically sign their children in and out of the facility. So there wouldn't be a vehicle queue like lined up to, for instance,
So the pickup and drop off there isn't school staff waiting outside the front door. The kid jumps out of the car, mom does a 3-point turn or dad and leaves.
Not necessarily. So they would actually park their vehicles and walk their children into the facility to check them in and out.
Okay.
And I can, the applicant, I'm sure, will have more to add.
And I'm sure they're taking notes. So I'll have, when we get to the public hearing and they're up, they can, and just so the applicant knows, I'm interested in how they talk about teachers and administrative staff working staggered shifts. I'd like to know how that works, and when those, when the staff would, what time during the day when they would leave, when the new staff would come in, and how that's managed vis-a-vis what looks like it kind of a pretty busy parking lot for most of the day. Well, for a 4-hour chunk of the morning and a 3.5-hour chunk of the afternoon. Are we requesting of the applicant? I noticed that condition 6, there will be no nighttime lighting except for security purposes. Wondering if we're requiring from them a lighting plan to know where those lights are going, and what they're going to be kicking off in terms of ambient light. And
Sure, I do believe it's shown on the elevations, the locations of the security lights. I'm not sure the lumen output, but that we can also defer to the applicant on that. But staff, we can require a photometric study in plan check as well to make sure that, the sensors aren't randomly going off, and understand that light output with those lights as well.
Okay. Okay, then I don't know if this will be in your wheelhouse or not, but I want to turn to staff written page 33. It's actually the playground and construction plan, and draw your attention to the construction legend. And I want to make sure I understand a couple of things. Is it your understanding that the existing parking lot will remain and it will just be expanded? Or is the entire parking lot going to be demoed and replaced?
I believe it's going to be resurfaced and reslurried as well as restriped. We typically require that so there's no cracks or anything in the existing parking lot.
And do we have any topographic survey work from the applicant that indicates the lot is compliant with Title 24 in terms of slope and cross slopes?
That was not included in the plan packet. However, it will be included in plan check.
Okay. And then on number 5, construction legend number 5, it says, and this looks like the, I guess it would be the western edge. It says, and also the back playground, it says existing concrete paving to remain, 4-inch concrete mow strip to be installed against all edges adjacent to new artificial turf. So I guess my question is on construction legend item number 5, where it has 2 identifying markers on the western walkway, which tells me that it seems to be saying it's an existing concrete walkway. Then it comes out and then there's a concrete walkway in front of the main building near the entry running the entire length of the parking lot. So my question there is, are all those walkways existing, or are they going to be reconstructed? It says existing and it will remain. My question is, I don't know if the main walkway in front of the building and the entry is going to be new or is existing. From what I can tell, it's just a striped pedestrian way in the parking lot.
I do believe it's existing. The concrete in the back near the playground equipment in the rear and side yard, I do know that is existing. Seeing the site photos for the site, that's kind of like an open play yard area, just concrete play yard area. And then of course they have the padded artificial turf to protect the fall zones from the playground equipment.
Do you see where I'm talking about, the walkway to the west and then to the south?
I do see that.
So the reason I'm asking is it's identified on page, handwritten page 27, project data and site plan. That western walkway and that walkway in front of the building is identified as a path of travel. So my issue there is, do those walkways meet slope and cross slope ADA standards if they're existing? And if not, they will have to be made to come into compliance?
Yeah, they will be required to come into compliance if they don't meet. Actually, the entire project will be reviewed with current building code compliance. So that will be a detail reviewed in plan check, but I'll let David, the architect, weigh in more on the existing conditions of that.
And I'm sorry to be a stickler on that, but I get hammered for this all the time when I'm processing applications with other cities. I didn't notice in our conditions of approval anywhere a requirement that the project comply with all Title 24 standards. And I don't know that we actually need to do that, but I'm not seeing anywhere in the code requirements for building, unless I'm missing it.
So it's actually handwritten page 10 is the code requirements. So under the building section, it does require compliance with, and then it lists the 2019 building codes.
And within the 2019 building codes or the ADA requirements.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Okie dokie. I think that may do it for me. I think the rest of my questions are going to be for the applicant. So thank you, Ms. Walsh, very much for your answers. Anyone else? Not, I will open the public hearing, and the applicant, Ms. Green, I see David is raising his hand, or was.
Mr. Chair, yes, Dave is the architect, I believe.
Okay.
Joseph is the applicant. And then we also have another applicant on for you. It looks like CGC.
Okay, so Dave, the floor is yours if you have a presentation to make. You're the applicant.
Okay, can you hear me all right with this
I can.
microphone? Excellent. I don't necessarily have a presentation, but I would like to address your concerns. You asked about the reinforcing of the wall. We were able to find the approved plans from 1965, and the wall is reinforced with number 4 bars at 32 inches on center, vertically and horizontally. And so it is a reinforced wall. The reason we're adding the bollards is we cannot confirm that that meets the impact standards that were presented to us. So we will add the bollards that will on their own meet the impact standards that have been defined. You also had a concern about the security lights. Those will be, there will be a photometric study done as we do the engineering to meet the minimum foot candles that will be required by your various reviewing departments. And that's what the security lights will meet egress and security photometric requirements. And that will be what determines the spacing of the lighting. You also asked about the parking lot expansion. The intention would be to reuse the existing asphalt that is in good shape and expand the parking lot, and then put a uniform slurry and striping over it so it will appear as a new lot when it's finished. If it can be done, we'll have to have the civil engineer look at the drainage and make sure that it drains properly and such. But the intention would be to use the asphalt that is still in good shape. And if it's not, then it would be removed and replaced. And
just a quick question: Have you done a survey of the parking lot?
Yes, we do have an ALTA survey, but what is the unknown is when we demolish the building that's on the. You can see in the plans you have, there's a building to be demolished where the new parking structure will be. We're not sure what the ground is under that because that building is a raised building, and so it's a little difficult to determine what the grading would actually need to be. But the intention is that it will appear as a new parking lot when it's finished. Some of it may be old asphalt underneath if we can reuse it, and if not, then we'll build it new.
Okay, and how about the walkways? Have those been, are you pouring a new walkway in the front of the new building?
Yes, if you look on the building where we give a demolition plan and a repurposing plan, you'll see that where that new walkway is. Well, it couldn't be existing because that's where we're demolishing part of that building.
Right.
So that all the walk in the front will all be new. And the intention is that the existing asphalt, which is in pretty good shape in the back play yard, is to reuse that. We do know that some portions will have to be removed because they do have more than 2% crossfall on them. And so we're right now developing the actual construction documents, but those are still in progress. But we have identified some that are not in violation of cross slope. And so certain areas will have to be removed. But the final product will be in complete compliance with CBC as well as ADA when it's finished.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to know. Okay. So here's where I'm wrestling to understand how it's going to work, and maybe I'm just being dense, which is certainly not out of the question. I have no problem with the use. I'm just wondering if 114 kids is too intense of a use. given the parking lot, and trying to understand how your traffic flow is going to work. You essentially have 114 kids showing up over a 4-hour period, it looks like.
Chair Derickle, if I may, we also have Joseph Heichel on the line, who is the applicant and operator of this site. And I think he did prepare a short, just verbal presentation that might speak on your question.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I don't know how I don't know how, if you have kids showing up in, dribs and drabs at 10-minute intervals over a 4-hour period. Tell me how your class structure worked, or are there formal classes, or I just don't understand how that slow kind of loading of the school in the morning and then the unloading of it in the afternoon is going to work. That many kids, I just don't understand. I can't visualize how it's going to work. Just seems like the parking lot's going to be a constant game of bumper cars. So help me out.
Hi, and this is Joseph. I'm the owner of the property and also for the business. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background, this particular project will be our 5th location in Orange County. So we've got one in Irvine, one in Tustin, one in Huntington Beach, and one in Santa Ana. And the way we designed the parking, the stalls, the number of stalls is based on the capacity of the other centers that have been operating at a successful, without any problems for the last, like Irvine, for instance, for the last 16, 17 years. And because the city of Costa Mesa did not have any specific zoning that requires a ratio of number of parking stalls for this specific use, we had to resort to the other centers, in specific the city of Irvine, that used a 10-to-1 in their code, in their planning code. They're using 10-to-1. 10 means 10 kids to one stall for the specific use. And Tustin when we built Tustin, we also referred to the city of Irvine as well. So for Costa Mesa, the architect ended up in corporate and ended up generating this parking study that used that, basically all the data that accumulated from nationwide for all the Kitty Academy nationwide, and specifics, the one in Orange County and in California. And it showed basically, because the parents are coming staggered throughout the day, that you're not getting 114 kids within the 4 hours. And I'm going to let Chris from corporate, who is also listening in, he will explain to you a little bit more in details about how the parking studies is generated from actual data. What we ended up using, it's very similar to what the city of Irvine ordinance and the city of Tustin, with the 10-to-1 ratio. We ended up basically with the 26 stalls. That includes the number required for the kids and also for the teachers. And we have never had any problems whatsoever. As a matter of fact, during the day, midday, our parking lots is pretty much empty because parents come in. We're open from 6:30 to 6:30. It's not like we're open at 8 o'clock and everybody has to drop off at 8 o'clock. We have a continuous curriculum throughout the whole day. So our classes do not start at a specific hours. So parents drop off as soon as we open at 6:30, and continuously they come in, at different times, staggered throughout the whole day. And that's why the parking lot, the way it's configured, has been operating at a very efficient, without any queuing,
So, Mr. Eichel, if I could ask, how do you schedule that with the various parents who are bringing their kids in when they're going to show up? What time the class is for their child?
So
arrange-
that's what I was trying to say, that we don't have a set schedule. The parents come in whenever they like, whenever they can. You know, since we're open at 6:30, we have some staffs come in exactly at 6:30. We have some parents come in at 6:30, and we have some parents that don't show up till like 10 o'clock or 10:30. Because each parents work either part-time or full-time, or sometimes they are on a part-time basis. So we do have always full-time, part-time. It's just a combination. And that's
so as a hypothetical, I'm looking at your traffic flow. It says drop off in the morning from 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. And this is just your traffic study. It says from 6:30 to 8, a total of 49 kids ostensibly, or according to the study, would be dropped off in that time frame. What happens if all 49 of those kids show up between 6:30 and 7:30?
Well, it just never happened for the last 16 years, number one. Number two, that's why the study shows 17, we're providing 26. So there's an extra buffer of 9 stalls right now that will accommodate any unforeseen that's never happened over the years situation. So if you look at the studies, what was showing is a total of 17, and we're providing 26. And that was one of the questions that you guys had. Why are we providing more? And, to answer, I think one of the other commission's questions, if we can use them for bike rack for an additional, and we're welcome to do something like that. But now the question is, if the study is showing us 17, and we've been operating for the last 15, 16 years in Orange County with the same type of demographic, without any problems, using that same, the city of Irvine ordinances of 10-1 that basically produced 26, but our studies are showing 17. So we have that buffer zone of an additional 3 and 6, that's 9 extra stalls to anticipate any unforeseen situation like the one you just explained.
If I may, this is Chris Camarado with Kitty Academy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I put in CGC. It was already there. I thought it just.
I knew it was you.
So we're the franchisor. We have 250 locations coast to coast, and all operate about the same. If you think about a parking space, parents come in, as you mentioned, in 10-minute intervals. So one parking space can generally handle 6 cars per hour. So that being said, using your example of every child coming in, the 49 that you mentioned, that's a total of 35 cars. We've got 27 spaces. In our 250 locations, based upon our projections and how families come into our locations, the peak times are from 7 to 9. So it is almost impossible for all those families to come in all at once, because we don't operate as a school. When you think about a school, 7 o'clock, the bell rings and you've got buses starting to come in. It doesn't work that way, because we are flexible in the way we start our business. So families generally start about 6:30, as Mr. Heichel stated, and finish up around 10 o'clock, the bulk being between 7 and 9, consistent with the other 250 locations that are operating. So in this particular instance, with 27 spaces and the unlikely event that all 35 cars would pull in at one time slot, I think we've got more than enough parking for this location throughout the morning and throughout the afternoon pickup.
So in those 250 locations, are there any jurisdictions where you got permits to operate those learning centers where the jurisdiction required you to develop some kind of circulation or traffic management plan for picking up and dropping off kids?
You know,
Okay.
I've been to, in my 20 years with Kitty Academy, I've been to almost all of the planning commission meetings and the zoning meetings. And I had one location in that time that required that, and that location ended up not getting built for other reasons. So we don't have any that are operating with a traffic management plan.
And just for my own, because I don't, you mentioned you have, Mr. Heikley, you have facilities in Irvine, Tustin, Huntington Beach, and Santa Ana. I have no way of looking at those to see how from a physical standpoint, they're configured differently relative to the parking lot. If the parking lot is bigger or longer or wider or about the same, if the parcel size is about the same, if the square footage of the facilities that the children are actually learning in are roughly the same.
Okay.
I just have a general concern that you have
If I may just interject, yes, to answer your question, it is very proportionate to the capacity, because you have to see it, you have to understand that each center has a different capacity. And when you follow the city of Irvine ordinance, when it comes to the ratio of students to parking, it all comes to it becomes a formula. So when you have in Irvine, for instance, we have 160 capacity, and we provided 29 according to the formula. And the formula within the city of Irvine ordinance talks about a drop-off. And the reason they allowed us to follow this specific ratio and ratio of student to parking of 10-to-1 is because we're providing a drop-off, not a queuing system. A drop-off means that we have a designated stalls for 10 minutes each that is contiguous to the walk-in, the concrete walkway from the parking lot into. So in other words, they don't have to park on the other side of the aisle. It will be designated. We have about maybe 5 or 6 stalls specifically for dropping off the kids, and the teachers will be parked on the other side. But the parents will have designated stalls, and because of that, it's very clearly defined within the city of Irvine ordinance, and Tustin followed suit. They did the same thing. They revised because they did not have their ordinance updated, because they hadn't had a child care center for quite some time. So they followed the city of Irvine ordinance. They updated it, and it reflects the same thing, which is 10-to-1 ratio because of the drop-off. So the definition of a drop-off is to be contiguous, so that the kids would not have to cross the street. It would be, they come out of their cars and they go straight into the building. They check in. That process takes about 10 minutes maximum, and then they come back and then they leave. And that's why Chris mentioned the study that basically represents actual conditions of over 250 centers nationwide.
So let me ask you a question. Does the same process work on the pickup time period? Does the parent come in, they have to sign them out? Does that roughly take 10 minutes? And then,
Yes.
And then what happens? Do the teachers bring the child out to the office to pick up, or?
No, they go in. It's a state. Again, we follow the regulation, the state regulation of.
But I'm not familiar with them. I am not familiar with those. Just tell me how it works.
Well, what works is that we have a computerized check-in and check-out system that is required by the state, that the parents have to come in, check in. We have the check-in monitor and check out at the in the lobby. So they check in and they go in. They go inside the classroom. They pick up the child. The child will be ready, and then they just they leave. It's not like they have to sit down and have conferences with the teacher. This is not part of our curriculum. So we serve, this is a child care system with a curriculum, but it's not like everybody has to come in and sit down. And we're not designed to accommodate more than that 10 minutes pick up and drop off every time.
Okay. Commissioners, are there any of the commissioners have questions for the applicant? I'll start with Commissioner Russell and then Commissioner Zick. Commissioner Russell, you need to unmute.
Thanks. On the north wall, are you adding a 6-foot, 7-foot wall there? Because when I was walking around the property, the wall right next to the condos is so easy to jump over. So are you going to add a wall there?
David, you have the dimensions of that existing wall.
Yes, the wall on the north property line, it does appear shorter because the wall along Anaheim Avenue is 7'4", so it appears to drop down, but we measured it along there and it's there is a sloping walk there and the wall takes steps. The anticipation right now is that it is 6 feet, along its whole length, and we would not be constructing new wall at that point.
Oh, do you have any concerns about people? Quite frankly, I could have jumped it. So do you have any considerations about, because I know you're there till 6:30 at night, Monday through Friday. How about 8 p.m. on a Saturday night? I've worked in enough childcare programs that when there's an open space and people can get into it, they'll do it. And the other part of my question is, again, some security issues. Are you putting any cameras or anything up?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We will have 24 hours camera, and also constant supervision is also part of the Title 22 regulation by the state. When they go out on the playground, they will always, and they will maintain also the ratio. So there'll always be teachers out there when they're playing. We've never, 6 feet has been the standard height. If it is less than 6 feet, we will definitely add more to the wall to make sure that it is minimum of 6 feet. So we've never had any cases of anybody jumping. We always make sure, this is part of our policy for the teachers to inspect the ground before that, they send the teachers out in case somebody throws anything over the wall. But we've never had anybody in my 25 years experience operating child care centers jumping over the wall like that. But we do have for security purposes.
Yeah, well, I'm less concerned about when you guys are there and more concerned about, weekends and evenings and places when you don't have teachers walking around. So you're going to have cameras that will be 24 hours a day.
Yes, absolutely. Recording.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
correct.
Thank you. That was my main concern.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my questions are for, and I apologize for not catching the first name, Mr. CGC.
Chris, come
Chris,
on.
I was going to guess Chris, but I hate guessing names. So Chris, I was following closely the discussion regarding the, I'll call it the parking management plan or lack thereof that our chairman had with you. And I had not had the opportunity to visit any of your other locations, but while you were talking with the chairman, I was able to take a quick look at some of them. So let me ask you a couple questions. Your location in Tustin appears to have a fairly similar arrangement of parking to the building in terms of orientation. It also seems to have very similar number of parking stalls. My question to you is, how many children do you have at your Kiddie Academy in Tustin?
It is, I'm Joseph. I probably have better knowledge
All
to
right,
the
Joseph.
capacity than Chris.
Okay,
It's 108, and we are providing 22 stalls in Tustin. So that kind of gives you a proportionate number. Since we're adding only 6 kids, but we're adding 6 more stalls.
so
And-
Joseph, thank you for that. That answers that question. I have a similar question regarding your Huntington Beach location on Beach Boulevard. How many children do you have that attend that Kiddie Academy?
Yes, Huntington Beach used to be a kinder care, and it was an existing setup that we took over about 3-4 years ago, and we were able to get the 190 kids. It's like our largest facility, and the stalls were are about 30 stalls, and it's working at full capacity. So now we have 190 kids with 30 stalls. And we're putting only like 114, which is almost, a little bit more than half, but we're providing 26 versus 30 stalls. So,
Thank
it's
Thank
been
you.
working perfectly for the last 4 years. at full capacity.
You've answered my question, and I'm satisfied with your answers. Thank you very much. And thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Chairman.
Thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, I will open this for public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak to this item, please raise your hand. And Ms. Green and Julie, I do not see anybody raising their hand. Any telephone calls? No.
No, Mr. Chair, we don't have anybody.
Okay, so I'll close public comment, bring it back to the commission for any further either questions of the applicant or the applicant have any final comments? If so, Mr. Heichel or Dave, please raise your hand if you want to make any closing comments. Okay, seeing none. Commissioners, what's your pleasure? Commissioner Perkins.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is I'll actually make the motion. I would like to move that we find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per CEQA guidelines, Section 15301, existing facilities, and further move to approve planning application 20-04, subject to the conditions of approval, with a additional condition that would allow them to reduce the parking provided down to 18 without having to come back to the Planning Commission or zoning administrator if they were to use the space for bike parking or convert the space to a usable landscape area, assuming that they find that their parking, that they do not need that or they have not needed that through their operational time.
Is there a second? Commissioner Russell seconds it. Any comments on the motion? Commissioner Zick?
Yeah, just a clarification on that extra condition, Commissioner Perkins. Should they have a desire at some point in the future to reduce the number of parking stalls, what I wasn't clear about in your language was what level of approval or what action would they have to take based on your condition?
The main thing that I would like to see is that they do not have to come back to a public hearing at the Planning Commission or even potentially have to go through zoning administrator. I would like it to be a essentially ministerial approval is what I am thinking, but I am flexible on wording depending on what would be the best option for that.
So that, okay, so I understand that. And so when you say ministerial, you're referring to the planning director?
Yes, I would be fine with that if it was planning director.
Planning director, okay. And so then a question, because I don't know, I'd like the planning director, Mr. Curtis's opinion on that level of approval versus having the zoning administrator approval. What is there a difference or advantage from your standpoint as to what you think that condition ought to say to be effective?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zick, really what you're getting at is the zoning administrator level decision requires a notice to the public, so it's kind of a quasi entitlement type of approval. If it's the director of development services, planning director, the approval may ultimately fall to one of the staff anyway, but it would be under the auspices of the director. So it really depends on what the intent of the commission is. If the intent is to say the applicant can reduce it down to 17 spaces or whatever the number is that you feel is appropriate, and without having to come back to the commission, it's just really up to the commission whether you want to say subject to staff approval or if you think it's important that notice be given out to neighbors before they do that.
So Commissioner Perkins, I'll tell you what my preference is and then get your take on it. My preference would be that it be the zoning administrator, so there is public notice. And the reason I'm thinking about that is partly because of the concerns that the chairman expressed that I began to share, which is the activity level in that parking lot in terms of the frequencies of cars coming in, moving around, kids and parents moving around through the parking lot. And the fewer number of stalls we provide, the more pressure there is on that density. And so I'd be very concerned about reducing the number of parking stalls without there being a complete eyes wide open look at what the situation was, and to ensure that we didn't all of a sudden have cars parking now over in the diagonal parking next to Lions Park and bringing the kids across because the parking lot got too chaotic. So my preference would be that your additional conditions specifies zoning administrator approval, in which case I could support that.
I would be perfectly acceptable with that. And I think the public input would be, I think, a valuable part of that.
The second concur with that?
I do.
Okay. Any commissioner comments on the motion? So I think it's a good use. I think it'd be fine there. I think probably the services needed in that part of the community generally don't have a problem with the use or the operation. They're clearly successful. My thinking is, just having looked at it physically, that it's awfully intense use. 114 kids in that space is quite a few. I have, the traffic study that was provided is assuming that everybody comes in 10-minute intervals, but they don't require it. There's no scheduling of the kids arriving and when they leave. It depends on the day. Some parents could say, oh my gosh, I have an early meeting. I got to get my kid there earlier this morning than I normally do. And it's a fairly narrow lot. And I just see a lot of backing in and backing out and going in conflicts, where potentially you could have 49 cars showing up within a span of 15, 20 minutes. Maybe not happen often, but it's not impossible. There's just no certainty as to how the cars will move in and out of there if they all showed up at once or even within a relatively short period of time. That being said, I mean, we could always come back and visit it if there was a problem. So it's not a deal killer for me. What is a deal killer is reducing the parking. I can't vote for the motion if the Commissioner Perkins addition to reduce parking, because I think that would be a mistake, is in there. If it's to stay in there, I understand why he wants to do it, but I can't support the motion with that in there. Commissioner Perkins, you still have your hand up. You want to offer any additional comments?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to address that and also make one other comment. My vision for the restriction in parking is to say, I think I trust their numbers, I trust their parking study, and I don't want to lock them into this 25 parking spaces in a future where we very well are likely to move into more biking and walking in 10, 15, 20 years. So I'm thinking that if at some point they can show, hey, we're just not using these spaces, these are just open concrete, I would hate to have them, you know, have to come back potentially full planning commission to potentially have to undo this decision that we are making on this day. So that is my vision on that, is just that. I don't know if that helps to allay the concern or if we could incorporate some wording on that.
Yeah, no, if it was a bigger lot or just, it was, you know, it looked like there was more wiggle room for it. Just, I just see a lot of like this going on, particularly if it's an unusual day. 114 kids bailing out and mom walking their kid from stall number 16 up to, you know, and maybe that they're marked, which by the way, I think we should condition is that staff parking spaces should be marked and identified, and parent student drop-off spaces should be identified. And, you know, if there's 12 spaces to, for 12 spaces or 14 spaces for staff, and the rest are for parents to drop their children off, pick them up. I think those stalls should be marked because we have staggered faculty coming in too over certain periods of times a day, and I don't know when they're coming in. It just seems like, to me, it's a real kind of mixing bowl with a traffic study. It says there'll be 10-minute intervals, but there's no way to control it, no way to make sure that that is happening. And you have 50 cars moving in and out of there in the morning and another 50 or so to pick everybody up. It just doesn't strike me as being an adequate parking field, nor drive aisle. So I would like to see a condition that they need to mark staff parking spaces. But again, if Commissioner Perkins, your addition to reduce parking or have a process to reduce parking, I can't support the motion with that in there. So, Vice Chair Harlan, do you have anything to add? Okay, unusually mum tonight. All right. Well then, Julie, could you please call the roll? By the way, I forgot to close the public hearing. Sorry. Close the public hearing. Julie, could you call roll?
Chair Jericho,
No.
Vice Chair Harlan.
Aye.
Sorry, that was yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Russell,
Yes.
Commissioner Zick.
Yes.
Okay, so that motion carries 4-1 with Chair Jericho voting no and Commissioner Colbert and Commissioner Torje absent.
Hey, thank you very much, commissioners. That decision is final unless appealed to the city council within 7 days. Good luck, gentlemen. Okay, how are we all doing? Does anybody need a break, or we're okay? Commissioner, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at let's say 7:35.
Okay, good.
Okay, we can go back live anytime.
Okay, 1 second. Ron, ready? Yeah. Okay. We're ready, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. We're back in session. And we are moving on to public hearing item number 2. Julie, could you read that item, please?
Public hearing item number 2, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Costa Mesa, California, recommending that the City Council give first reading to an ordinance, Code Amendment CO-2020-04, amending Title 13 of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code relating to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units and related fees. Please note that we have received 3 written comments from Rosemary Caron, Mike Gankar, and Mike Lingle that have been provided to the commission and made a part of the record.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Mr. Glupos, the floor is yours. You have to unmute, Mr. Glupos.
There you go.
There we go.
Hi, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Willie Glupos, the Assistant Planner for the city. Tonight, we will be discussing the code amendment for the accessory dwelling units. So accessory dwelling units, as we may know them as granny flats, in-laws, or second units, provide independent living facility for 1 or more people and usually come in 3 general forms: attached, detached, or conversions. To give a historical context, ADUs were first regulated in January 2017 with subsequent refinements until October 2019, where the state required cities to relax and eliminate many of its development standards. The city then passed an urgency ordinance in December 2019 in order to retain the maximum remaining discretion to regulate these units. Within the ordinance, there are state-imposed ADU standards and proposed ADU standards. The state-imposed ADU standards must allow a property owner to at least an 800 square feet accessory dwelling units that is 16 feet in maximum height with a minimum 4 feet side and rear setback despite city regulations. However, with the passage of the city's urgency ordinance, the city has some discretion and modification to the state imposed standards such as the number of ADUs, the size, setback, and height, open space, and parking. Throughout this presentation, I will highlight major standards comparing the two. As briefly mentioned earlier, ADUs comes in different forms. We have detached, which is separated from the primary residence. Then we have the attached, which shares a wall with the primary home. Then we have conversions, such as second-story conversions, accessory structure, or garages. Then we have second floor ADUs. The type of residential structure on the property determines the number of ADUs allowed and size of the ADU. To the left column, you will see that the state-imposed ADU standards require that the city approve at least 1 ADU that is 800 square feet in size. It may be detached or non-habitable space conversions such as garages. To the right is the proposed ADU standards, which allows 1 ADU but larger square footage. This is to encourage ADU development only within residential zone properties, meet landscape requirements, and convert existing interior spaces opposed to garage spaces. Similar to the previous slide, The only difference is that the state imposed ADU within a multifamily, the standards allows for a maximum of 2 ADUs opposed to 1, or 25% of interior non-habitable conversions. The proposed ADU standards to the right would be similar to a single family requirement, except that junior ADUs are not permitted in a multifamily zone. In all cases, the state requirement is the default minimum standard. In regards to setback and height, the side and rear setback per state is 4 feet. Staff has no issue with this requirements. However, a 4-foot setback, especially for exterior side setback or the second story ADUs, may impact development pattern and privacy. So the proposed ADU standard is 10 feet setback for exterior side, as seen to the diagram to your right. This would create consistency in development standards. For second story, an ADU on the second floor is permissible, provided that the primary dwelling is 2 stories or the garage is at the rear of the property. If the owner decides to add above a garage, it must first be determined if the primary dwelling is 2 stories or the garage is located at the rear of the property. Then the following requirements need to be met, such as the ADU built above the garage, the second story does not exceed footprint of the garage if it's a detached garage. New garage or ADU structure does not exceed 2 stories. The windows on the second floor has to be 25 feet away of a neighboring structure or dwelling. Second story meets setbacks to accessory structure of underlying zone. In terms of conversion, a second floor can be converted into an ADU, such as bedrooms. For open space, state imposed standards must allow that the development of at least a detached ADU that is 800 square feet, regardless of open space, provided it does not exceed 16 feet in height and 4 feet side and rear setback, regardless of open space density, FAR, etc. But any square footage beyond 800 square feet, staff is proposing that the property owner must meet the 40% open space, which is consistent with city's development standards. State law effective earlier this year imposed parking standard with exemptions for replacement of parkings. These exemption includes half-mile walking distance to a transit stop if it's located within a historic district, if the ADU conversion is within the primary residence, ADUs located on a parking permit only street, there is a car share within 1 block of the property, and if a property owner decides to convert a garage, carport, or a parking structure, then they would be exempt from parking. So with the data collected from OCTA, the map to your right shows that the majority of Costa Mesa properties are exempt from parking. Staff is proposing, instead of 1 mile walking distance, we are proposing that it's 1 mile radius to remain consistent with how the city measures distance to a property. To preserve architectural, residential, and neighborhood consistency, an ADU must be consistent in architecture to the primary dwelling unit. The facade of a garage conversion must be substantial, must have substantial architectural articulation, and the entrance of an ADU or junior ADU should be subordinate to the main residence. So prior to state law, granny flats were only allowed in single family zones. Now ADUs are allowed in zones that permits residential dwelling, including mixed use zones. Junior ADUs are only allowed where single family dwelling is permitted. As seen on the table below, ADUs are permitted within the PD zone, planned development zones. Junior ADUs is consistent with the city's land use for single family dwelling. So the state law allows applying the park impact fee in proportion to the square footage of the main house. In terms of ADU, if it's less than 750 square feet, there is no impact fee, but anything above that, there would be a proportional calculation. The city applies the apartment park fee rate for junior ADUs. Specifically, junior ADUs would be subject to $5,000, and ADUs is a proportionate fee of $13,572. So the adoption of the ADU ordinance would allow for construction and conversions of new ADUs in a more cohesive and integrated design. The city meets the state standards. It would enhance again and preserve the visual quality of city's neighborhood while meeting the intent and requirement of state law. City could count ADUs toward the regional needs allocations if need be. Staff proposes some modifications to the actual proposed ordinance. Staff proposes to modify section E3 so that it's consistent with state law, and it should read as follows. Except as otherwise provided by law, ADUs and junior ADUs may not be sold or otherwise conveyed separate from the primary residence. Also, section E14, minor typographical errors. It should read subsection E14 instead of E, it would be B. Subsection E14 instead of F, it would be C, so that it's consistent from A through C. So to conclude, staff recommends Planning Commission to adopt a resolution recommending to City Council the approval of the ordinance and finds that the ordinance is exempt from CEQA, and recommend that the City Council give first reading to an ordinance approving CO-2020-04, amending Title 13 relating to ADUs and authorize related fees. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, we are here to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glupos. I see that the vice chairman has his hand raised, so the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
For
Chair.
questions.
Yes, you thought I was going to be quiet this evening. Well,
No.
I've been waiting for this item. Thank you, Mr. Glupos, for that presentation. There was some new information there, so that was actually very helpful, especially with regard to how much of the city is actually subject to the parking exemption. So I think I just want to jump into some questions first and then provide my comments and context a little bit later. I'm hoping that the commission can make a decision tonight based on information. I really think that this is the kind of code amendment that requires some actual data to work with. So I'm curious, Mr. Glupos, if you can tell us how many applications the city has had to date with regard to proposed ADUs.
So we have at least 42 ADU applications to date, and they are continually coming in.
And so that's since 2017, basically?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and of those applications, how many have actually been processed by the city? I mean, where a permit's been issued?
So in 2018, it's broken down as we have 4 permits that were issued, 2 that actually got a C of O. In 2019, 6 permits has been issued, and 5 has received a C of O, and the rest are in 2020. Again, they're all in different stages of construction.
Sure, of course. And I asked this question. I'm not sure if you've been able to do any kind of analysis, but I'm trying to get a sense of what generally is the nature of some of these applications. So what would be an average size, average height? Are these more detached or attached?
So to answer your question, the average size has been around 700 to 800 square feet. That's the size of the ADU. We received a few that were approximately 1,000 square feet. In terms of the actual height, it has varied, but the urgency ordinance this year, we have only received single-story proposals. And in regards to if it's attached or detached, we receive more detached ADUs, and we actually rarely see any convergence of bedrooms. They decide to do more of a detached. In terms of the actual location, majority of them are actually towards the rear. And in terms of the actual average lot size that these proposed ADUs are being implemented, that's quite tricky because well, I would say that it would be around 7,000 square feet, I would say.
Okay. I mean, I know when we initially took this up a few years ago, we had, as you noted in the staff report, a higher minimum lot size requirement. So it really did in some ways limit where we might see proposed applications. Do you have a sense too of where throughout the city we've been getting applications?
That I don't have that data for you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And then with respect to some of the proposed code amendments, I want to get an understanding. Can someone build a 2-story detached ADU, which is independent of a garage?
So how it's drafted, no, we don't allow a 2-story ADU. We do allow a 2nd-story ADU.
Okay, but that 2nd story would have to be over an existing garage.
Correct, or it can be a conversion within the 2nd story.
Okay, so if somebody had a, let's just say, legal non-conforming rec room, or even a permitted rec room, they could make modifications and then convert that into a 2nd-story ADU.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, I think I'm going to stop there for now, but I may come back with a few more based on what my colleagues might ask at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and I see City Attorney, Mr. Porter, I noticed you raised your hand. Did you want to provide us any background prior to all of us getting into?
Yeah, I just had one addition. An additional very minor tweak is that within section 9 of the ordinance, near the end of the ordinance, it would clarify that the effect of this would be to repeal the existing urgency ordinance. That's implicit, but why not make it explicit? So then the revised section 9 the second sentence would be revised to state urgency ordinance 19-19 and any provision of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code or appendices thereto, and set forth. Basically, it will repeal the existing ordinance. So that would be additionally part of the staff recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir. Commissioner Perkins and then Commissioner Zick.
Great. Thank you very much. Number of questions. So one, I wanted to follow up on a question by Commissioner Harlan. Willie, you were mentioning there was data that most of the ADUs coming in were averaging around 700 or 800 square feet. I quickly looked in our current ordinance. Am I correct in understanding that our current urgency ordinance limits ADUs to be an 800 square foot maximum?
So under the existing code or the existing urgency ordinance, it establishes essentially more or less what we're proposing tonight, which is pursuant to the state overrides, you can always get 800 square feet for a single family residence. Additionally, but if you're proposing to act consistent with the requirements of the code, there may be instances where you can go more. So for example, you might be able to get 850 or 1,000 or maybe potentially even 1,200 because those numbers are established by state law.
Okay. I guess, yeah, thank you for that. That helps. I appreciate that. I think one question I have, and this might be actually for you, Mr. Porter, is why do we have sections B and C separately? So for those who haven't read the ordinance, section B is accessory dwelling units, single accessory dwelling units. Section C is state imposed alternate standards for accessory dwelling units. These are two, as I understand them, two alternate pathways people can select among. I personally found them confusing to try to parse together the requirements of each of these two individual sections with all the other tie-ins with all the other sections. So I just wanted to ask, what is the reasoning for that? Why do we have those two?
So first off, I completely agree. This whole statutory scheme is extremely complicated. And so you are not the only person to recognize the complexity of this ordinance and this entire statutory scheme. So let me just be clear. So the reason that it is set up in this manner is because that's how state law is set up. So state law has two tracks. It says track number one, which is our ordinance, section B. It says, yes, you have some discretion in how you regulate. Now you can only regulate based on these size, these distances, it's set forth. And then subsection C is no matter what, ignore everything that Costa Mesa wants to do. You have to approve it if it looks like the following. Essentially 800 square feet, 16 feet in height, 4-foot side and rear setbacks. So the reason it's complicated is because that's how state law is set up.
Is there, and I think I know the answer to this, but is there a possibility of combining the two sections of saying, hey, we're going to approve X, but then if you want to go higher than X, is that a possible way of drafting it?
Unfortunately, no, because, well, what you could do, we can't merge B and C together because otherwise we would be losing some of our ability to regulate. Now, if we wanted to be more liberal and allow more things, we could do that. For example, we could get rid of, if that was our sole goal, we could remove C and say, well, we'll increase the standards to be, well, if it's a 1,200 square foot unit, regardless of what your ordinance says, it's approved. So therefore we don't need C anymore. But then you would be losing your ability to regulate, to establish all these other regulations, design requirements, what have you in subsection B. So if you want to retain any level of discretion, you need to keep B and C separate.
So I guess help me understand what we would lose in it, because I guess I see a lot of the design criteria are sort of actually in section E, which apply to both. So I guess I'm looking quickly at the open space and landscaping seems like one that we would lose if we were to do that. What else would we be losing if we were to do that?
There is potentially, depending on how you interpret state law, I've seen people arguing that subsection E, there's the state overrides the state law, essentially our section C. They say, well, you can't have any design standards at all. So if you wanted to put an ADU in the front yard with a 0-foot front yard setback, that we have to allow that. And we're saying that's ridiculous. That is not what the state intended. So if you so we're saying that both of those apply, but let's say a court disagrees with that analysis. Well, then we can say, well, at least you can sever that provision. You notice we have a provision at the end of our of the ordinance that says, sever the things that are illegal. Let's say that that's illegal as applied to subsection C of our ordinance. Well, we could still apply those design standards for everything that is greater than, let's say, 800 square feet. So that's one example of many.
Okay, that actually helps me understand this a lot. Thank you. I guess one thing when I'm thinking about drafting this, one thing that I found that I think added to the complexity of this, and I guess I'm viewing this from the perspective of, Jane Q homeowner trying to figure out what she can do as it wants to move grandma in, say. But one thing I found that was particularly confusing was the very different structures of B and C. So would it be possible to draft B and C so they had precisely parallel structures so you could easily sort of compare what your two options are? Because the two very different structures make it, I find, very difficult to compare. and obviously that would be a very big job. I'm wondering if it's an even possible thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at B and C. I'm not sure that we really can, because the way that state law is crafted, we really have to do it in this manner. There are a few policy decisions that we can talk about if you want to within C. We can always be more liberal. We can allow more ADUs than the minimum standards. And there are some instances where city staff decided, oh, we're going to allow more than the minimum. For example, we don't have to allow ADUs to be above a garage, but staff is saying, hey, you know what? If they're going to keep their parking space in the garage, we're fine with that. That's one example. So there's a lot of other instances like that where we're trying to be thoughtful and come up with good, I'm going to say compromises, essentially make everything work for everybody.
Yeah, I think continuing on with the sort of, I guess, complexity, I was just trying to piece together all the various size cutoffs that we have. I think I saw 500 square feet, 800 square feet, 850, 1,000, less than 50% of the size of a building, of the existing structure. I guess, is there a way, would it be possible for us to say, just pick a number? I mean, it depends on the number of bedrooms, it depends on the zoning you're at, it depends on the type. Is it a possible thing for us just to say, look, ADUs can be 1,000 square feet, whether it's 0 to 50 bedrooms, however you want to design it, you just can't be greater than that. Again, I find that I would sort of think of this as a matrix of sort of space, and the matrix of decision space we're creating is insane. And so is that a possibility?
So it is a possibility. So those numbers are the same numbers that the state has established. So they say if you're going to have your own ordinance, you must have at least these size requirements. And we set those bars at the exact same level. So if you wanted to, you could increase the numbers. So instead of it being, and we always have to allow 800, well, you could change it to, you always have to allow 850. So you've gotten rid of one level of complexity. Well, then what about the number of bedrooms? Well, you could increase it to 1,000, or you can increase it to 1,200. Or so, yes, you could increase the numbers to decrease the complexity of the code, but you're also allowing larger ADUs than you would otherwise be forced to allow. So that's a policy choice.
Okay, that helps. Thank you very much. For the impact fees that we were talking about in the presentation, looking at the impact fees, am I correct that these are park fees that we're looking at to try to, so what's the purpose of this impact fee? I guess if I could help understand.
So they're already required to pay development impact fees, but what we're doing is we're essentially making it clear in our code that is what we're requiring. So specifically park impact fees.
Okay.
State law. So the reason for those tweaks is just to say, yes, previously we hadn't specifically called out ADUs. Now we're making our code clear. Here are the rules for ADUs. Here are the rules for junior ADUs. You'll notice in there, we're not asking you to establish the amount of the fee. That's the city council's determination. And frankly, legally, we're not required to come to the planning commission for that. They could just do it themselves, but this is an ordinance. Let's just do it all at once. This is just saying city council will have the right to figure out how much those fees are. We're merely saying that they have the right to do that. That's what this ordinance is.
Very good explanation. Thank you. And so just to make sure I'm understanding, right now, currently, the way City Council set the fees, if I wanted to build a separate ADU in my backyard, I would be paying that full $13,000 and change. If I want to build a junior ADU, then I would be spending roughly $5,000. But there was this, I think there was a portion of the presentation, there was a proportional sliding scale. So can you walk me through how that will work for this?
So our code, so as staff is implementing our code, the ordinance says we're implementing it consistent with state law. So all this ordinance is doing is just saying, yes, what staff has been doing informally is really going to be formal now. But yes, there is the amount of the fees. State law says that you cannot charge for ADUs. You cannot charge development impact fees in excess of 700 for any unit that is 749 square feet or below.
Okay.
At 750 and above, you can charge fees, but the amount of the fees has to be in relationship to the size of the primary dwelling. So in my example, let's say if you have a 2,000 square foot home and they're proposing a 1,000 square foot ADU, that is one half of the size of the primary dwelling. So the ADU would pay 1/2 of the fee that the primary dwelling would have to pay.
So if we were talking about a separate ADU for this, then we would be talking about, they would be paying 6,000 some at that under current fee structure. Okay. And I guess it does sound like this is City Council's decision. I'm personally very torn on this. I can understand when we're looking at this as rental properties, charging fees and impact fees. You know, if you have a developer who owns many properties. On the other hand, you know, Janet Q property owner who wants to have grandma move in, I feel that you know, grandma wants to be independent, but we all know she needs help. So we're going to build a little unit for her in the back. If we build a 751 square foot unit, I worry that we're making someone pay $5,000 extra to have grandma move in, and they may already be financially stressed. But again, a decision probably above our pay grade. When I'm reading through this, we have junior ADUs and small interior ADUs. Where is the cutoff or the boundary line between those? Because we have ADUs that can be built inside of a house that potentially could be less than 500 square feet. So how do we tell whether you're a JADU or just a small interior ADU?
Okay, so there are, within what I'm going to call the state override, this is the no matter what, you must allow this to occur. There are two, so that's our subsection C of the ordinance. There's two instances where we must, no matter what, in the single family dwelling context, you must allow it. Number one is the new ADU in the backyard. 800 square feet, 16 feet in width, no more, greater than 4 feet, and it at least needs to be side and rear setbacks of at least 4 feet. Okay, so that's, or if they have an existing structure, then they can convert that existing structure into an ADU. So if you have an existing garage, they want to change that to an ADU, allowed. They want to change a portion of their existing pool house into an ADU, approved. If you want to change a portion of your existing single family dwelling that was legally built and you want to put a wall down the middle of your house and say this part's the ADU and this part's the single family dwelling, approved. So that's what's meant by the internal structure. So, but there's a whole separate set of rules specific to JADUs. There's a separate code section, and so you can have in a single family dwelling property, you can have both an ADU and a junior ADU. The junior ADU cannot exceed 500 square feet. This is the best way to understand this. I think the policy is we want grandma or grandpa to be able to move in with the kids. I really think that's what this is about. Because the unit is no greater than 500 square feet, they're allowed to share a bathroom. Even though it's a separate unit, they're allowed to share a bathroom facility. You wouldn't do that if it was truly a separate family. Additionally, it is mandatory that that the property owner live either in the primary dwelling or in the JDU. So you would, if you're not truly a member of the family, why would you do this? You really wouldn't. I think that's what this is about. Whereas, amazingly, we can't, in a lot of instances, we cannot even require people, like, we must allow them. We cannot have an owner occupancy requirement for the ADU. So they're different, a little bit different. And then also a JADU, you can have an efficiency unit for a kitchen, an efficiency kitchen. So there's specific requirements that are just a little bit easier and smaller, let's say, for a JADU.
Okay. So they've got different impact fees. They have that the sharing a bathroom allowed. That actually helps me understand the owner occupancy. That was another question that I was actually going to ask, and that makes a lot of sense if that is what possibly is happening. For the owner occupancy, I was noticing in our code, we have something about in 2025, things potentially changing. And I remember this was one of the things we talked about a while ago with ADUs. So I just wanted to clarify, I think it's section E5 is where we talk about the covenants. So let's say I'm building a JADU in 2024, and I'm just a property owner who's already renting out my house. Does that allow me to rent out both the primary structure and the accessory structure for all time? Or in 2025, are we reverting back to an owner occupancy requirement?
So the requirements as currently drafted, the most that we're allowed to do is if the ADU is built in 2025, then these rules will kick in. Okay, but if you're built between now and then, we can in no way require owner occupancy. Even in 2030, we can't require owner occupancy. So what this says is, unless the law is changed, and quite frankly, between you, me, and everybody listening to this meeting, I think the law will change to allow this to occur. So what it says is, or that meaning the law will probably be changed to say, no, you cannot require owner occupancy. Then if we keep that provision in our code, then we don't have to come back to the Planning Commission and say, can we amend our code to get rid of this thing that Sacramento decided to change? It's already in the code. But if we are, as drafted, if we are still allowed to require owner occupancy on the lot, then that would be a requirement. It's not mandatory that we do that, so that's a policy choice for you all, but that is included in your.
Okay, especially personally, given our RENA numbers that we see coming up, and the need for housing, especially small housing that's affordable, I wonder if we need that owner occupancy requirement kicking in 2025. But that's a discussion for everyone. Another one, and I am approaching the end of my question. Sorry, I have a lot. This is a big one. I noticed that when we were looking at utility connections in section E4, we have all ADUs and all JADUs must be connected to public utilities. And I am certainly not going to debate sewer and water. Indoor water is fantastic. Indoor sewer is maybe even more fantastic. But the electric connection, I wonder if we might be hindering ourselves with sustainable development in the future. And I wonder if it might be good to allow some flexibility where if in the future the state allows construction to be off-grid electrically through solar and battery systems, would this prevent somebody from doing an off-grid electric house as it's currently worded? And again, my idea here is I think right now, as I understand, I think building codes may even require electric connections, but say the state were to change that, solar and battery technology is getting better and better, we may not even need an electric connection in 10 years.
And Mr. Porter, the observation that I would make is just that I think in different sections of the code, in one place we say may require, and in another place we say must be connected. So I think we probably just want to do a little cleanup there to more closely match our intent.
So state law says we're allowed to require utility connections, and generally speaking, it's a mandatory duty because, well, you must be connected to sewer. That's just state law, that sort of thing. What you could do would be, if it's the will of the Planning Commission, we could craft some language to, I'll come up with the exact language, but it would be something of like, or an equivalent, standard, or, something like that, where some fuzzy language to allow that. That's an option.
We had discussed perhaps when required or if required as an option, but I'm happy to discuss your wording, Scott, and we'll take it from there.
Let's see, I think, so the other things, you know what, I think I'm going to wrap up there and see what other people ask, and I might come back to this. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Perkins, for those questions. I was enlightened by half of them and confused by the other half. Not by your questions, but what I thought I knew got undone. So let me start by saying, Mr. Glupos, I loved your presentation. I loved your PowerPoint presentation. I would like to have a copy of that PowerPoint presentation sent to me. I think I would have wanted to study that as much as I did the staff report, because the diagrams were very helpful to me. So if I could get a copy of that, I would appreciate it. There was something else in that presentation that, as you were going along, I found very encouraging, at least as I was interpreting it. When you were showing a comparison between the state standard and our standard, what I got the impression of, and so I'll put this as sort of as a question, tell me if I was wrong, because I'm thinking maybe I was now in light of some of Commissioner Perkins' questions. I was under the impression that the state requirement, which in almost all cases when you showed it, I didn't like. I'll just use that as my, I have stronger language, but I didn't like it. Makes no sense to me. And then you showed our standard, which I felt like, oh, okay, well, that looks reasonable. That looks favorable. That looks smart. That looks appropriate. And so I got the impression as you were going through it, that for the most part, we were throwing out the state standard and we were putting in place our own ordinance that made sense by smart people that understand how to preserve neighborhoods and community as opposed to how to ruin them. But then we get into this section C. That's where I got confused. I got confused because it made it sound as if all those bad ideas that were coming from the state are somehow still an option for people in spite of all the good ideas that I thought you were replacing it with. So, boy, that's, if find a question in there, I'd look forward to your response.
Well, I think we're, the state overrides, I think in subsection C are, I think you're understanding it correctly, that there is a provision in state law that says notwithstanding subsection A of that code section, which is basically our subsection C, subsection B, says notwithstanding any of that, you must approve a unit if it meets the following standards.
Even
So,
if it doesn't meet our standards.
Correct.
So our standards mean nothing to somebody that doesn't want to follow them.
Correct.
Well, isn't that like putting a speed limit sign that somebody says, well, that was a pretty sign while they step on the gas?
So there are, so the state overrides are very narrow. So the state overrides are very narrow, meaning if you want to build a freestanding ADU, you can build it up to that size. But what if you want to build something larger? What if you want to do something that is not one of the very limited things that is authorized by state law? You want to build a 1,000 square foot ADU, you cannot do it via the state overrides. You must comply with our ordinance. So it's essentially, I think the state is thinking, well, in exchange for meeting what I'm going to call good municipal ordinances and regulations, will allow you to build a larger unit.
Okay, I think I understand that answer. I think I accept that answer. That sounds reasonable to me. I have a couple more questions, but I don't want to lose this thought. First of all, Mr. Porter, I have so great amount of respect for you and the guidance and the explanation and the command of this material that you have. It is painfully similar to the small cell site discussions that we had, where you had sort of the same command of information and the same theme, which is the big guys are telling us what we have to do and we have very little choice about it. We're stuck. And I know that that's not your, you're not putting us in that position. You're our expert helping us manage within it. So I appreciate that, but it frustrates me nonetheless. So there is on page 7 this statement that talks about the open space, and it says units that exceed 8, and this would be still within section B. Units that exceed 800 square feet in gross floor area ratio shall meet the open space requirements. And so, Mr. Aglupos, I'm recalling one of your slides that showed two pictorials. One that was, I thought, a horrific example of putting buildings on land that had no open space. And then the nice, pretty diagram that showed a smart ADU with good open space. So is this saying that if a person puts an 800 square foot ADU on their land, their lot, which is small, and they don't meet open space requirement, that's okay, as long as it's 800 square feet or less?
Correct, yes.
Wow. So you have a small lot, you want to ruin it and take up all your open space, you're welcome to do that. That's just lovely. I know that's not your idea. That's just lovely. My other question has to do with that section E3, which you had on one of your slides. And I wanted to ask about that. And that's on page 10. Now, as I read page 10, I liked it. As I saw the slide in your PowerPoint presentation, I didn't like it. And what I like on page 10 is that it said that ADUs and JADUs may not be rented separately from the private residence. I like that provision. However, your slide crossed out rented. Could you explain that? Mr. Glupos?
So, well, I'll jump in. So
okay.
That's because state law, that provision is, it talks about essentially the purpose of these ADUs is to provide affordable housing, which is generally rented. So you can, if, for example, you, if let's say you have a property owner on site, if they live in a single primary dwelling, well, you can rent out the ADU to a separate family. So I think that was more of a technical fix, rather than the purpose of that is to say that it cannot be sold separately. That's a requirement of state law, in fact, which I think is utterly duplicative, because how could you sell it separately? You can't, because that would be an illegal subdivision, but I digress. So the point is just that everything on the lot needs to be sold all at once. Now there is an exception. If you're Habitat for Humanity, they have their business model. They got a carve out for that, and we have a carve out in our ordinance. But that's, except for that, you just can't sell them separately.
So in this situation, the way this is, somebody with an R1 property can build an ADU and rent out that ADU separately.
Yes.
And that's because that is what the state's intention is, and we can't undo that. Or is that also because that's what our city intention would be as well?
That is state law.
State law, we can't get around that.
Correct.
That's incredible. That is incredible. And we have all of this to handle a situation where right now we have a total of 42 applications. We have all this stuff, and it's so complicated that I think very few homeowners would be able to go through this and figure out what they can and can't do with their property. They'd either have to go down to the city and say, I know I'm the owner, but I don't know what in the world I can do. They got to ask the planner, or they got to hire a team of lawyers if they don't agree with or understand what the planner's telling them. That's what we're doing. That's what the state's doing, right? Some genius up there. All right, I'm done. Thank you. No offense to anybody here. You guys are the real geniuses.
None taken. Anybody else? So, Mr. Glupos and Mr. Porter, I want to, because we received some correspondence from the public related to this. I want to make sure we're crystal clear on when a second story ADU is allowed. So if somebody can walk us through that again, ABC, when is a second story ADU allowed?
Willie, you want to take that?
Yes, let me look at the subsection that talks about the second story.
It's subsection 9. I can jump in if you want me to. So within our section E9, it says, okay, well, normally you can't be taller than 16 feet, but you can in these instances. And then subsection A says if you meet all 6 of those requirements, that's when you're allowed to have an ADU. That essentially would be 2 stories. So number 1, I can't remember all these. So if
not 2 story, I'm talking about a second story. So above a garage,
or within a single family dwelling that is already 2 stories. So if your single family dwelling meets, let's say you don't even have a unit there right now. It's raw land. You can build a new house that's 2 stories, and that house complies with all code requirements. And then, oh, by the way, I'm putting an ADU inside of that house. That is legal.
Okay. So I have a garage, and I have a front primary residence that's single story, but the garage is separate, completely detached from the single story primary residence. Can I put a second story ADU on that garage?
Yes, if it's in the backyard, or believe, isn't there a carve out of, or if the existing house is 2 stories, then it can also be 2 stories.
So yeah, because one concern I've heard from a couple of people called me, they're saying, so I have to have a 2-story primary residence to have a second story ADU, and that's not true, provided the second story ADU is on a garage that's separate and in the rear of the yard of the primary residence. Okay. So my other question is, why did we decide 1,200 feet was an appropriate max on square footage? So so it's 800 minimum, but in our code, we're saying you can go up to 1,200 feet.
So if you're complying with our ordinance, then depending on the type of unit, I know this is super complicated and eyes are going to roll to the back of our heads, but this is how this works. So there's different standards depending on whether it's attached or whether it's detached.
Correct.
If it is attached, then I'm trying to remember. I can never remember. If it's detached, it can be 1,200 feet. Am I remembering that one correctly?
That's
detached.
Right.
Okay.
So attached is 1,000 feet, up to 2 bedrooms. Detached is 1,200 square feet, and that's what. And state law mandates that 1,200 feet maximum.
So we can raise the number, but we have to allow at least that much.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. That's it for me. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, I will open the public hearing, public comment on this item. Anyone wishing to speak to it who is on the Zoom webinar call, please click the raise hand button. And I see Randy. So I believe the microphone is open, so you can speak. You just have to unmute yourself. There you are. Go ahead, sir.
Who is the sir you're talking to? Is it Randy?
I'm talking to you, Randy. You're good to go.
Thank you very much, sir. I'd like to ask about the 1,200 square foot upper limit that the city is imposing. I understand that the city wants maximum flexibility. However, if the city already has setback requirements, if the city already has height restrictions, if the city already has open space on the lot requirements, if the city already has a bedroom count requirement, and given that the majority, or at least a plurality of the stock of houses in many of the areas where rear ADUs make sense, or alley loaded ADUs make sense, that elder or older housing stock is in the 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 square foot size. Why do we need the upper limit of 1,200 square feet if the homeowner can meet all other requirements for open space, height, setbacks, bedroom count, etc.?
Mr. Porter, do you want to take a crack at that?
So it's a policy choice. The 1,200 is, we must allow at least 1,200. So if we wanted to, as is being suggested by Mr. T-Tac, that we can increase that number or remove it entirely if you wanted to. Yes, there are constraints. We have open space requirements that apply throughout our code. So the question is, do we want to exempt ADUs from those open space requirements and treat them differently than you treat other types of units?
I'm not suggesting to eliminate the open.
Mr. T-Tech, let him finish his answer, please.
Sorry.
Yeah, so he is correct that there are other limitations within the code, setbacks, etc. So the question is, it's a question for you, do you want to increase the number or not?
Okay. Any other comments, Mr. T-Tech?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Porter. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form to eliminate the open space requirement. I'm suggesting if you otherwise meet the open space requirement, by virtue of the fact that you have a smaller existing residence. In other words, if you have a 1,300 square foot main residence on a 7,500 square foot lot, why should you not be able to put a 1,300 square foot ADU on your alley? Thereby you would have 2,600 total square feet on a 7,500 square foot lot. If some of that is 2 stories, your open space requirement can still be double or at least 1.5 times the city requirement. So it seems like an arbitrary upper limit when you already have all the other restrictions in place to keep your maximum flexibility at the city. It just seems like an unnecessary upper limit.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next speaker is Mr. Gankar. The microphone is open, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a specific issue with ADUs, let me tell you the story. Prior to the state, it's my understanding that I could have built an over-the-garage ADU on my 3-car attached garage, except for the fact that I don't have a 7,900 square foot lot. So before the state ever came into play, one of the only things that stopped me from building that was the lot restriction. And in fact, Ms. Shabi helped me get a reasonable accommodation to in fact build this ADU, despite that fact. That was in 2019. But realizing the state was in motion to do some things, we didn't proceed on with that. But at that time, I think, Mr. Zich, is that you talked about renting ADUs. I believe that prior city code allowed people with lots over 7,900 square feet to build ADUs and rent them. So I don't think that's anything new. I may be wrong in that. The other issue is someone spoke about only 42 applications. Well, we would have had a number of, I think I'm in the lot of a number of different people who, because of the 7,900 square foot, we couldn't make an application. And then when the state came in and said, aha, we're going to lift a lot of these restrictions, they put another one on us, which is the 16-foot height limit, because the state didn't perceive that somebody would build over a detached garage. So that stopped us there. So I believe that in fact, what we're talking about here, with probably some very minor additions, is the old ADU laws or ordinances of Costa Mesa were certainly impacted by the state. And I guess we have to live with that. But I think what's happening, as I mentioned, I think you have the opportunity now to make some changes in the state law that you're allowed to make that would Costa Mesaize this law. Because I think there are I can go down the alleys of East Side Costa Mesa and I can count tens of over the garage ADUs. They exist. They're there. So while there's only 42 applications, I think a better question was, how many ADUs really exist in Costa Mesa? I think that quite a few do. So I appreciate all of your work in this regard. I have another question though. I'm not sure what first reading means in this process.
So this would go to the city council if moved on, recommended by the planning commission. By law, they have to do a first reading of the ordinance. They may modify it. Typically, if they do, then it comes back for another first reading, but you have to do 2 readings of an ordinance. So it'll be reviewed essentially twice by the city council. So we're just recommending a first reading.
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, Mr. Gankar is finished. Mr. Caroni, you, your hand is raised and you are now, have we opened up the mic to him, Ms. Green? There we go. You're now good to go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, well, one, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's time. And the presentation from Mr. Aglukos was excellent. I guess I'm glad we had the clarification on the single family main structure and the detached garage in the alley, that we can go over that. That was actually, especially East Side Costa Mesa, kind of a big showstopper for submitting permits, because we love the little cottages here in the front. We love our little cottage. We love living in it. And, my son's special need, and we're trying to get a place for him. So I'm glad we did that clarification. The only ask I think we would have is if we could put a footnote in that, because we did run into issues before specifically with that, trying to get our permits. And that was the reason it was declined. And so where we can clarify some of that, it would go a long way, because it did create some confusion there. That's probably my only ask.
Okay, what was the reason for the declining of your permits? Or
they specifically said because the garage is not attached, or because we didn't have a 2-story, it didn't make a difference if it was a detached garage in the alley.
Where is your garage located? In the rear of your property?
Yes, it is. So, and there are lots of houses like that over this area. Everybody likes their cottage.
So I just want to make sure I understand, so you walk away with an answer, Mr. Porter, Mr. Aglupos. Under this revised ADU, he would now be able to permit a 2nd-story ADU over his garage?
Correct. So provided that he's saying that the primary resident is single story towards the front, and the detached garage is towards the rear, he can construct an ADU above that garage. And again, as long as it does not expand beyond the footprint of the existing garage.
And just as a quick follow-up, thank you very much, by the way. As a quick follow-up question, I guess, is that something that hold up moving the permit forward now, or are we going to have to wait for the revised ordinance?
No, so you're going to have to, this has to move through the process. So city council has to adopt this ordinance. So we're a few weeks away.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you for your comments. So just some clarification too on height limit. I noticed that the maximum height is 16 feet unless it's located above a garage or within an existing two-story structure, in which case the structure shall comply with maximum height limit of the underlying zoning district. So 22 feet for a flat roof, 27 feet for a sloped roof. So I'm assuming that our last speaker, if he decided to put an ADU on top of his detached garage in the rear of his yard, he could go up to 27 feet. Okay. Who else so we have Vice Chair Harlan with his hand. Oh wait, do we have any other members of the public wish to speak to this? See, everybody who's in the queue has spoken, so I'll close public comment. Vice Chair Harlan, and then Commissioner Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a question for Mr. Porter about the structure of the ordinance. So I'm of the impression that Section B is what is required by the state, and in particular that 1,200 square foot area. Is that correct?
Well, in a lot of ways, both B and C are required by the state. So C, I would say, is more required. Like, we have more discretion in B than we do in C.
Okay, so in B, then we can add provisions such as number 8, which is the open space landscaping. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I mean that is one way clearly to, for lack of a better word, just limit the size of a potential ADU based on having to supply a certain amount of open space, and that is largely driven by the lot size. So, well, I just want to offer some general comments here at the moment. I don't have a motion initially, but maybe you'll get a sense of where I'm headed with this anyway. I think Commissioner Zick's questions and his exasperation illustrate the troubles that we have just generally with accessory dwelling unit ordinances, and in particular what we have before us tonight. I think what we struggle with is the state mandating certain standards in a very kind of broad brush approach. And then we try and fine tune it in a way that meets our specific needs. And I don't think we're actually quite there yet with what's being proposed. I think staff's made a good effort here, and without really having policy direction from either us or the council, this is a good starting point. But I think that there are some serious policy considerations we really need to take into account for a future discussion. And among those would be, how much do we want accessory dwelling units to be developed in our city? I mean, just generally, is this going to be a new housing typology that we want to promote? And if so, do we want to make accommodations with regard to, as Commissioner Perkins pointed out, waivers or reductions in permit fees? I think a big issue that we haven't quite addressed here is really, what do these mean for an impact on the neighborhood form? In my East Side neighborhoods, as plenty of the speakers pointed out tonight, we have a lot of alley-loaded accessory dwelling units. Maybe they were just permitted structures before, maybe they're legal non-conforming. I'm not quite sure, but I would suggest that if we're going to have an accessory dwelling unit ordinance that's going to be easy to implement, or relatively easy to implement, maybe that's a way to get some of these non-conforming structures into conformance. I would much rather have legal units than what exists today. Other policy considerations, rentals versus ownership, that's a big debate citywide. And do we want these ADUs really to be contribute to our arena numbers? I mean, obviously we have a huge number to reach in this housing cycle. I don't know, based on what we've already been told about the number of applications and the number of units that have been developed in the last 3 years, whether that's going to make a huge dent. It probably won't, but you don't know. Maybe that's some options. And then also, is this going to be something to encourage multi-generational housing? Is that a policy that we want to promote here? I think that there's two ways of looking at that. It's potential granny, units, as we've talked about traditionally, or potentially it's housing for kids who go off to college and come home and may need a separate place to stay, or is it a potential rental opportunity for somebody who's looking to try and bring in some extra cash flow? All of these, I think, are important for a full discussion, and not the least of which is that we need to tailor things to the different conditions that we have in our city. East Side is different than Mesa Verde. The land use pattern in Halecrest and Mesa Del Mar is different than what we have in the Civic Center area. We have a lot of variety, and I don't want to see us make the same mistake that we are charging the state with, which is a broad-based one-size-fits-all approach. I think we probably need to take a little bit more time to look at what this really means for visual impact to our neighborhoods. I already have a sense of what it's like based on the speakers tonight in East Side, but I'd like to learn more about what it would be for elsewhere in the city. So those are my my initial comments at the moment tonight.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think for this, I think one question I have, and this sort of follows up on Commissioner Harlan here, is what kind of encouragements? I know one of the things I had I think sort of heard discussed or seen other cities doing, maybe I'll say it this way, is trying to find like pre-approved plans or things like that. What kind of encouragements are we looking at doing as a city to help homeowners understand this ordinance and maybe even encourage them to move down this pathway?
Mr. Curtis or Ms. Lee, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Perkins, a couple of things that we will do. Obviously, we will do our best to present the information in a clear, concise manner that's easily understood by the public on our city's website, and to also have easily understood information to disseminate through that. Some of the things we've looked at doing as well is we've had a couple of contractors or builders approach the city with the idea of getting pre-approved for standard plans for ADUs within the community, where someone could just buy one essentially out of a book from them and not have to spend time going through the plan check process. We had a couple of conversations immediately prior to COVID with a couple of builders, and kind of have gotten dark in our discussions with them over the last couple of months, but I expect soon that they'll probably be back discussing with us. We have every intent, our building division is supportive of doing that, and we have every intent of moving forward along those lines. We would just need to get the plans from them and have them reviewed and signed off. I expect there'll probably be a lot of people moving into that niche over the next few years, because it's, obviously it's going to be a statewide initiative with recent changes to state law. So those are a couple of things we're going to do. We'll also work through, other methods we have through social media and other tools that the city has to get the word out that the city allows these, and links to information, and also staff, so that people have questions, they know where to get the answers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is I think an important class of housing. I look at this from, supporting families and also students that I teach Orange Coast College. Just them trying to find housing that's appropriate for a student on a super limited budget. It's incredibly difficult right now, and this could really help with that. So I'm very excited about it. I do think, like Commissioner Harlan, I guess I would like to see as much of this to be sort of clarified as possible and maybe simplify that. Some of that might even be renaming A and B might sort of help. State imposed alternate standards doesn't really help me too much. So I don't know if you can think of two names for the two different tracks or something like that. I personally could really see simplifying the maximum square foot requirements. I think that would go a long way to removing, the complexity. We have JADUs versus ADUs, which it sounds like we can't change. But then within ADUs, we have attached, we have detached, we have interior. If we could make just 1 square foot requirement, we could delete sort of a lot of that complexity. I could definitely agree with some of the commenters that I think the maximum size, I could see letting the community decide as long as we have our open space, as long as we have good design. I don't see why we couldn't allow potentially larger here on that. I think 2-story, I think there was a comment we got an emailed in that was commenting on 2-story, again, wanting to make sure we could do it. I think as long as there is safe, concerns with, overlooks of residents and whatnot, I think 2-story could be a way to maintain open space and allow creativity in design. And especially with something this new, I don't want us to micromanage the design of these so much that they become not permittable or not feasible. Let's maybe let the space go. So I think those are my thoughts where I think I would like to see potential on those if my fellow commissioners would like to see that as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really liked the comments by Vice Chair Harlan, not because he sympathized with my my grievances, but I think the I guess what I'm feeling like is many of the things that come before the Planning Commission are actionable from the standpoint of getting a decision, approve, not approve. The majority of things that come to us are of that nature. But there are other things like this that I think are of a different nature. And I would go so far as to say that there's an obligation of the Planning Commission to do some planning. I might be wrong about that. Somebody else in this business might think, nah, planning commissions don't do planning. Planning staff does planning. Planning commissions, they just vote on stuff. I'm reminded again of the work that we did with the small cell site ordinance. There's a difference with that one. There was the difference there in my mind was we had a lot of public input and comment. They didn't like what we were doing, understanding that there was some, great constraints on what we could do. But there were a lot of ideas, a lot of input coming from the public saying, hey, change it. No, we don't like it the way it is. And I think from that standpoint, it really put a burden on us to hang on to the action, do more planning before we kick it up to the city council, then have them try to figure their way out of the corn maze. And to me, this is a little bit similar, except we don't have a whole bunch of people from the public saying they don't like this. Could be because I don't think the public could probably figure out most of this. It's almost disappointing we don't have input from the public, either saying, gosh, we love it or we hate it. But it feels to me like there's more planning that needs to be done here. And I think some of the comments and inputs from Commissioner Perkins suggests some of that as well. And I think there's an overarching feeling where I think we have to think about what is our intent? What are we trying to actually accomplish with this? What are we trying to prevent? What are we trying to incentivize and encourage? And unless we're clear about that up front and can speak about that in lay terms, then all this legal gobbledygook doesn't stand a chance of getting us where we're going. Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And I'm not sure we have a consensus on where we're trying to go with this. Are we trying to have this be the granny flat, the multi-generational? Are we trying for this to be a way to solve the so-called housing crisis? We don't have enough houses for all the people, so we need to build a whole bunch of houses, maybe, quit driving cars and we'll use the streets and we'll build a bunch of houses there. I mean, is that really what people are thinking? I mean, that's nutty. Is that the problem we're trying to solve? Chasing the RENA number, is that what we're trying to do? So I feel like this needs more work. And the only struggle I have is just voting to continue this item. I'm trying to think in my mind, so what will happen in the interim period? How will we get this? And if I'm, reading between the lines on Vice Chair Harlan, how do we get this, and even Commissioner Perkins, how do we get this into a form that is more digestible, number one, and accomplishes or addresses our interests for as a city, for our intentions. So that's what I'm struggling with. I really don't like the idea of these half-baked ideas coming out of Sacramento, and then we've got to figure out how in the world to make this square peg fit into our round hole. I don't like that one bit. And what I'd rather do is, if we could, try to set aside that square peg and figure out what is the shape of the hole we're trying to fill. What is our intent? Then put the two together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm done rambling.
Thank you, Commissioner Russell.
By the way, I did have one question when you want to come back to me.
Oh, okay. Hold on, Commissioner Russell.
There we go.
Hold on. Go ahead.
I'm 2 for 2 tonight. I was quite surprised at the lack of public input on this item. I was expecting, hours of public comment on whether this was a good idea, and I'm not sure whether it's because it is too confusing for people, or whether it's a matter that most people don't want ADUs in their backyard and they don't care. As a housing advocate, I'm really supportive of any kind of ADU, whether it be a granny flat for multi-generational, or if it's for kids that are coming back from college, or if it's an additional income source. But I do think that perhaps to take another look and get more specific, whether it be through more input from the community. Maybe they don't, I don't know why they didn't want to do this, whether it was not on their radar this month. But I think to some extent, we're trying to look too deeply into this from the perspective of, yeah, it's going to be all those things. And how do we make it as easy as we can for people to understand it? And then just think of, I don't know, I guess I don't want to put it on hold for another period of time and would like to see it move forward, whether it be spending a little bit more time tonight to give the staff direction. So anyway, those are my comments.
Commissioner Zick, you had a question?
I did. The question related to short-term rentals. I guess kind of a two-part question. Do we allow short-term rentals in the city? People that want to just Airbnb their house? And then related to that question, would we allow these ADUs to be short-term rentals? Is there a prohibition against it is really my question.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zick, to the first question, the city does not prohibit short-term rentals in the city. I think there's been some interest expressed in regulating them and considering regulations and potentially transit occupancy tax and opportunities and things like that from the regulation, as well as to ensure that they're good operators. To the second part of your question, I'll defer to Mr. Glupos or Mr. Porter as to whether or not it's expressly prohibited in the ordinance. I can't remember. A lot of cities expressly prohibit short-term rentals of these.
Mr. Porter, do you have anything to offer? Or?
Trying to remember what we did. So I know that state law says that we must prohibit short-term rentals if they are approved via the overrides. In other words, subsection C of our ordinance. We are allowed, if we want to, we are allowed to allow short-term rentals under subsection B. But the default, but as drafted, it's prohibited throughout. I will confirm that, but that's my recollection that we're totally prohibiting short-term rentals entirely.
And
Mr.
if
Porter,
that's
I
the
believe
case,
you're correct. In subsection 16, it states short-term rentals prohibited. ADUs and junior ADUs shall not be rented for a term of less than 31 days. The question would be, is that provision for everything in the ordinance, or was there a carve out that I didn't see? But that provision is there.
and Ms. Lee, did you just read that from the ordinance in front of us? Oh,
Yes,
I see it.
did.
On
It's
page
a
9.
handwritten page 14 is where I was reading from, but I believe it's in multiple places.
Yeah, okay. I see it on page 9 also. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'll take a stab at trying to advance this and hopefully give a little direction to staff if we get some consensus, because I share Commissioner Russell's concern about just sort of letting it linger. I will share that, I talked to a number of residents in the East Side, as well as some people in the real estate industry. All of them had the same impression, I think, that most of us had going through this, which is this is as clear as mud, and I don't know what to make of it. So I can't even, provide some input. So having said that, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Ashabi, but I think you had prepared something in a prior discussion that showed different typologies on different lots. I know I've seen this elsewhere. So for example, I believe we were sent today by Mr. Toller the Santa Cruz manual for ADUs, and it gives a very good visual representation of different kinds of conditions, whether they're alley loaded or certain size lots, certain shaped lots, to look at what ADUs really can be. And I feel like that's what's been missing from today's conversation, is we don't have a visual idea of what these actually look like. I think we got some of that in the presentation, but not to address the variety that we have in the conditions across the city. So if something like that can be prepared, I don't want to put more work on staff's plate, but I think that might at least spark a conversation about what might be acceptable in certain areas, and maybe we can come to some general, broader idea about what is suitable. Maybe we might need to have some more tailored conventions in certain parts of the city, but I mean, my hope is that we can have one type of code structure here that's easy for everybody to understand, that it isn't really defined by exactly where you live.
I could address that. Our intent was to have a checklist and a handout for the homeowners that would make more sense than the ordinance to follow, and have some examples and some scenarios that people could use as examples. The samples that I had in the past, they mostly address, and I do have them if you'd like to see it, they do address the parking situation, where parking would be most appropriate to be provided. And we had some good examples of that. With this new state requirements, actually parking has become less of a concern because in many cases it's exempt. But we can definitely look at different scenarios. Our intent was to have a handout that has that information, and obviously it's more understandable than just written text.
Thank you. So my recommendation would be to continue the item tonight with that direction. And certainly if others want to weigh in on what we want to see staff consider or bring back, we certainly should. I mean, I'm hoping we can do this in at least, maybe at most one other meeting, maybe a longer meeting, but a meeting too, where also we could possibly get more input from the community, because I feel like that is a missing part for tonight's discussion.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
That is.
So a motion to continue to a date certain, Vice Chair. Do you have a date in mind?
I do not. I believe, well, certainly not by August 10th, which I think is our next meeting. And I believe we're dark the following meeting. So sometime in September looks to be
Chair,
possible.
if I may, I would suggest continuing the item to the September 14th meeting. It's our first meeting in September. I think that's a reasonable time frame considering, and if we need a little bit more time, we can continue it again, but I believe that's an appropriate date.
Okay, and Mr. Porter, given that the existing ADU law is operational in the city of Costa Mesa, so anybody could submit and process under the current state ADU law.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so there's a motion, and Commissioner Perkins and then Commissioner Russell comments on the motion.
Yeah, I think continuing to a date certainly is a good idea. I think we don't want to drag this conversation out, but we need to make sure this is correct. I've heard, I think almost everyone who's commented on this has commented on the complexity, and in Mr. Porter, your comments, you've helped me understand why that complexity exists, but I guess I would ask that we try to reduce some of that complexity if we can. And if that means maybe raising the caps from the state minimums to a sort of more universal total, I think that could be exceptionally well worth it for making this simpler. I also think we should look at this from, and we've talked about some of the policy decisions. I think from my view, this is a way to help address our RHNA numbers, to help get some more housing in the city. Our city is jobs rich, it's housing poor. Many people want to live, who want to live in the city can't do it. Many of my students have incredible times finding housing and incredible frustrating times, I should say, not incredibly good, but very frustrating times. It's very challenging for them to financially make ends meet, and being able to rent a little couple 100 square foot carve out in someone's house would be great for them. And so, but also trying to help, grandma move in, trying to help multi-generational families find spaces. I think these are all good things that if we write an ordinance that is broad enough and flexible enough, we can let the market decide, let people decide what they want to do. At the end of the day, I think this is about, letting property owners decide what they want to do with their houses and their property. And I really think if we can be as flexible as possible, we will be giving people the ability to make a little bit of money, maybe help grandma, help their, disabled child, whatever it is, help them live a better life here in Costa Mesa. So that's what I would request: simplification. The changes I think staff had proposed, I would completely agree with as well. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll support the motion. I think generally, I think we're trending in the right direction on this. I think we have no choice. I think, despite what some may or may not believe, what the state is doing it because cities aren't responding to what the state believes is a housing crisis. And unless the political profile of Sacramento changes in the near term, which given the imbalance of power up there, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. If we don't respond to these kind of issues on housing, the state will do it for us. And this is a classic example. This is why I'm worried that, we have Measure Y on the books that makes it very difficult for developers to gin up the courage to bring applications forward for housing projects in the city because they just don't want to put up the capital and take the risk of putting it in front of the voters. And so I think, some kind of modification to Y I think is important. I wish the council would take it up. I think we should exclude some cities from parts of it. Otherwise, if we don't provide or plan for 11,000, 12,000 units in the next cycle, we can expect more state meddling in our land use decisions. And we'll be stuck with ordinances that essentially with up to 1,200 square feet RDU that our R1 neighborhoods start to look like R2 neighborhoods. So I get everybody's frustration, but local jurisdictions aren't responding. They're saying no to everything. And the state has had enough and they're fed up with it. And so they're flexing their muscle, asserting their authority. And ordinances like the ADU, state ADU ordinance that's been passed are examples of how they plan to do that. And I think if we shirk our responsibilities on the RENA side of things, when we get to our housing element, and enough jurisdictions do, you'll see the state meddling even more and with a much bigger hand and a much broader stroke. So we all need to wake up. And if we don't want our R1 neighborhoods turned into multifamily zones, we need to start planning for housing in other areas of our city that aren't currently zoned for housing. So with that, I will ask Julie to call the roll.
Chair Jericho?
Aye.
Vice Chair Harlan?
Aye.
Commissioner Perkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Russell?
Aye.
Commissioner Zick?
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0 with Commissioner Colbert and Commissioner Torje absent.
Okay, so our dear friend that wanted to build his ADU for his son is gotta wait till at least sometime in October probably. So poor guy. Anyway, we have a ceremony to get to honor and celebrate our friend Barry Curtis, who is retiring at the end of this week. And we wanted to make sure that to the extent that we could, given the situation we're facing where we can't all be face to face, recognize Barry for his service to Costa Mesa with a proclamation. So Jennifer, I will turn it over to you and then we'll have commissioner comments.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. As you might imagine, this is a bittersweet meeting for me and for our staff. After 35 years of service, over 35 years of service and 3 years with Costa Mesa, Barry, our director, has decided to retire, and this will be his last Planning Commission meeting. I know I represent the staff as well as the city as a whole when I say that we are extremely grateful for Mr. Curtis' leadership, his professionalism, the sense of humor that he brings to this job, and the dedication that he brings to his staff and also to the Costa Mesa community as a whole. So we've prepared a short proclamation, which I'd like to present. First, starting with whereas Mr. Curtis joined the city of Costa Mesa in July of 2017. Whereas over the last 3 years, Barry has led the department through processing a record number of applications and building permits, all through 3 very challenging budget years. As a result, Barry has become an expert at finding loose change in couches to fund the department's various work efforts, which we very much appreciate. Also, whereas
Barry has overseen the department's work on several general plan amendments and rezones, code amendments, including the small lot ordinance update, the overlay zone updates, and the wireless ordinance, which I think we all remember, as well as numerous other significant projects like the library, the permanent bridge shelter, the Orange County Museum of Art, Education First, International Language School, the press, the plant, the Vans headquarters expansion, and many, many more very important projects to Costa Mesa and the community. Whereas Barry took on the Development Services Director role the year the city had a record 8 ballot measures proposed, with 5 approved by the voters of Costa Mesa. And under Barry's leadership, the city has now settled into its role in implementing Measure X and Measure Y, has overseen the transition from 5 to 7 city council members and planning commissioners, pushed the city's economic development program to new heights, put the city on the right track to address Costa Mesa's RENA allocation in the upcoming housing element update, and last but certainly not least, has led the department through the more complex than we ever imagined COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas the city is grateful for Barry's leadership, experience, expertise, practicality, sense of humor, his investment in his staff, his commitment to high quality work, teamwork, problem solving, creativity, customer service, and of course, his commitment to Costa Mesa. Whereas Barry's staff have indicated that they will miss his leadership, but will particularly miss the rock and roll music blaring from his office after hours when he works late, his practical jokes, which we can't describe here, his puzzling love of Apple products, which some of us understand, but some of us don't, his excellent whiskey recommendations, and his great sense of style as evidenced by his ever more creative hat and tie choices, which he insists on wearing during our Zoom meetings, especially as of late with COVID-19. Whereas although there is a great deal more to say about Barry in honor of his continual effort to keep presentations short, we will now conclude. Therefore, be it resolved that the Planning Commission of the City of Costa Mesa hereby recognizes Barry Curtis for over 3 years of dedicated service to the City of Costa Mesa and over 35 years of dedicated service in local government. Thank you, and we wish you the best in your retirement. Barry staff will present this proclamation to you in person, along with a gift at safe social distances, of course. But from the bottom of our hearts, we really want to thank you for your leadership, and you will be missed.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for Commissioner.
Commissioners, anybody want to, that was excellent, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Any comments from any of my commissioners? Vice Chair, then Commissioner Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know how to kind of top that. I think Jennifer covered everything. I mean, that really does encapsulate Barry, which I think is a testament to your leadership, that your staff knows you so well and so deeply. I think another testament, which we learned tonight, is the fact that you're wearing a tie with all of the photographs of your staff. I mean, if that's not a gift that keeps on giving, as well as one that shows the kind of respect that you've earned and your ability to really connect with people and mentor them, and as well as not just within City Hall, but in the community. I don't know what else is. The only thing I would add is that, Barry joined the city only a couple months after my father had passed away, and his name incidentally was Barry. And while I don't think of you as a father figure in any way, Barry, you're too young for that. You and a constant source of stability for this commission and the city, and for me personally as well. And I think you have done an amazing job in the last 3 years. We are definitely going to be sad to see you go, but know that you are not going to be too far away. So thank you very much. I appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure, by the way.
Commissioner Russell.
Yeah, I don't remember when I first met Barry. I was somewhere between Jamboree Housing and the Kennedy Commission, and over the very many years. And I've always been struck with his commitment to being a good public servant. And I think that's reflected in that in 3 short years, the amount of things, I mean, large projects that he shepherded through. He's always been an advocate for balanced communities, and being able to get affordable housing built. And I'm just personally very sorry to see you go, because I've been enjoying working with you over the last year. So good luck. Have a good retirement.
Thank you, Diane.
Commissioner Zick?
So I also agree that what Jennifer went through can't hardly be topped by more talking. I'll take an attempt to give a perspective that I have. We could probably list your accomplishments, and they've been listed. And it's rather surprising, actually, that in only 3 years, the list of projects that people would think of as accomplishments is exceedingly long. But I think what's most impressive to me about you, Barry, and I've told you personally a number of times how impressed I am with your leadership. But I think what impresses me the most is the accomplishments that you walk away with, in my mind, can be counted by the number of people who respect you and will miss you. And that is not only employees, not only commissioners, not only other city staff members, but every community member that you've interacted with. I think it would be probably unanimous. And to me, that's your list of accomplishments. It's the people who, after you leave, will still want to see you. And that's a rare in a person. And I want to congratulate you.
Thank you very much, John.
So, yeah, I'm going to miss you a lot, Barry. You know, I've been in this county. I remember when there were more orange trees than houses. Actually, I've been here that long, and I used to trundle around Irvine when I was a youth. My dad would take me down to El Toro Airport to watch the air show in the '60s, and you just basically ran through a bunch of orange trees, and you were at the air base. And I think, you know, the kind of work you do, Barry, the kind of work that any of us have done on any of the commissions, apart from what Commissioner Zick said, which I think is the most important, the people who you touched and who respect you and admire your talent, who learn from you, who want to stay engaged with you. That's the most rewarding thing about a career in public service. But what I hope you'll remember as you travel around the county is remember what I said about Orange County when I was a kid and how it was just all orange groves. I think it's one of the best planned counties in the world. And I think that has a lot to do with people like you who have come through and put their imprint on how this county is going to grow and develop, and how to mix housing with open space, with cultural and institutional development, with commercial. I mean, Irvine is a lot the way it is today because of what you did there as the master plan evolved, and what you've done in Costa Mesa over the last 3 years. There's so much you can be proud of that I hope when you come through the city or you go through Irvine, you say to yourself, I had something to do with that. That's a great lasting reward that I know I treasure from my time on the Parks Commission and my time on the Planning Commission, and I hope you treasure it as well. I think the imprint of Barry Curtis in Orange County is in a lot of places, so I hope you take pride in that. I'm going to be in touch with you because I trust your expertise and your counsel. I hope you don't mind if I call you, or I'm going to ask if you'll meet me on Main Street in Seal Beach for a beer somewhere. But I'm going to miss you, but you deserve every moment of the retirement that is ahead of you, and I hope you enjoy it with you and your wife, and Godspeed to you, friend.
Thanks, Byron. And if you guys are done, can I say a couple things?
You bet.
I appreciate that. So anybody that knows me knows I'm not real good at hearing people talk about me. It's kind of I'm sure most of you feel that way, but it's very nice, and I appreciate the sentiments. I want to thank, the support. I want to thank the City Council. I want to thank the Planning Commission for their support while I've been here. It's been, constant support, and it's really helped me, and it's made me enjoy my job. I also really want to thank Jennifer and all of the staff in the Development Services Department. You talk about the things we've accomplished. You talk about all the projects we've done. You talk about all those things. It's not me. It's a bunch of other people getting lots and lots and lots and lots of work done. And then I get to get, accolades for their hard work. We have a great staff in the city. I'm excited for Costa Mesa moving forward. I think we have a great young department that's going to continue to serve the community for years ahead. But, I just want to say that working for the city of Costa Mesa for the last 3 years has been an absolute highlight of my career. I love Costa Mesa. I love the people in Costa Mesa, and I'm thankful for the opportunity that I've been given to serve folks of Costa Mesa. Kind of to your last point, Byron, I'm looking forward to continuing to follow Costa Mesa and continue to get to follow my staff and watch them continue to grow, and also hopefully the world gets a little more normal soon, and I can actually spend some time with each of you that I would have liked to have done in leaving. So really just wanted to take 1 second to thank you all for the sentiments, and really to thank my staff for all the support and for the great work they do. It's really on them.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so that moves us to departmental reports. Mr. Midihia, do you have any report tonight?
Mr. Chairman, no reports tonight, but I would like to take a moment to thank Barry for his leadership, for his guidance, and for his great personality. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Jennifer, do you have any development services report? I'm going to assume you're going to take that mantle for the interim.
Well, still with Barry at the moment, but no report this evening, Chair.
Okay.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple from City Council last
you're
week.
retired. No, go ahead.
So last week, the City Council voted 6-1 to place a measure on the ballot for the electorate to consider allowing retail cannabis sales and delivery within the city of Costa Mesa. So that will be on the November ballot. And the City Council also took action to, you'll recall back in May, the City Council took action that allowed restaurants and churches to move some of their activities outdoors for social distancing and best practices. They took a similar measure last Tuesday, which will allow retail and service businesses to do similar if need be is in the coming times.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Preziosi, City Attorney report?
Chair, I have no report this evening, but I want to sincerely thank Barry Curtis for making my job and the rest of the city attorney's job much easier in the past 3 years, and he will truly be missed.
Thanks, Darkman. I'll miss you guys.
Agreed. Okay, thank you all very much for all of your good work. Julie and Ms. Green, thank you so much. Bart, thank you. Staff, you all did a tremendous job again tonight, and I appreciate it very much. And we'll stand in adjournment till the meeting of August 10th. Good night.
Thank you, guys.